Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start today with the Indigenous Territorial Acknowledgement. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather today is the land traditionally cared for by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. So just a brief moment of reflection. Recently, about 2 weeks ago, two Waterloo residents, were Paul Bourne and Dr. Donna Strickland were honored with the Order of Canada, which I think obviously is a tremendous honor and recognition for two residents in our community. So we had invited them to come today to, just to be recognized and to receive a certificate and our, gratitude. However, they were unfortunately not able to make it. So we've asked them if they can attend a council meeting in January 2023 so that we can more formally recognize them and their achievements on behalf of our community. So, in their absence, we just want to extend our congratulations and our sincere congratulations to Paul Bourne and Dr. Donna Strickland for their incredible achievements. So down to council business. Does anyone have a disclosure regarding their pecuniary interests? Seeing none, I need a mover and a seconder for the approval of the minutes from the previous council meeting. Councillor Vasic and seconded, was that you, Councillor Roach? All in favor? That's unanimous, thank you. Sorry, Jilly, that covers all of those, right? Okay, so I think we, at this point, I'm going to hand the chair over to Councillor Freeman, who is the finance chair, budget and finance chair, and she will chair the remainder of the meeting. So let's give us a moment here. No.
That's the same for me. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just getting plugged in here. And thank you, Mayor McCabe. So the next item on the agenda is staff reports. It's the consent agenda. And I wanted to know if anyone wanted to pull any items from the consent agenda. Yes, Councillor Bodley.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Freeman. I'm hoping to pull C and D just for a question, please.
That sounds great. I was kind of hoping those would get pulled from the agenda myself. So with those two items removed, that leaves items A, B, and E. May I have a mover for those motions? Councillor Bodley, a seconder. Councillor Roach, all in favor? Carried. So moving on to items removed from the consent agenda. The first one is the 2023 building standards, fees and charges. Councillor Bodley, did you have a question on that?
Yes, please. Thank you. Through you, Chair Freeman. So my question was just about the City of Kitchener seems to be holding since 2020 on their building standards fees, and we're sort of catching up to them. And I'm just curious if the 12% increase is something that perhaps not this year, but going forward is something that we need to continue to monitor in light of where our neighbors to the south are, or if we have any further comments or thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn that over to staff sorry, I can't see everyone at the staff table, but I'll just turn it over.
That's okay.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Chair Freeman.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you through you, Chair Freeman. To Councillor Bodley. We are monitoring that. This year for rates for 2023 will still be below the City of Kitchener rates. They have held their rates for the last couple of years due to significant surplus in their reserves, similar to where we were in that 2009-2010 period of time. So we are monitoring it. We will be looking at those fees accordingly, just based on where all of our numbers are at, as well as the different fees. So there's actually a range of where we're catching up with Kitchener. We also review comparisons to Cambridge, Guelph, and some other surrounding areas. We actually just met last week on that. So to answer your question, yes, we are monitoring that going forward.
Thank you. That was the Chief Building Official, Beth Maxwell, in case anyone was wondering. So thanks, Beth. Was there any other questions on this particular agenda item? Mayor McCabe, did you have a question on this one?
Not on the building fees.
Okay. So I'm just going to ask for a mover then of item C. Councillor Rowe, seconded. Councillor Bodley, all in favor? That's carried. Moving on to the rental housing and business licensing fees and charges. You pulled this one again. Councillor Bodley, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, sorry. And this is less of a question and just more of a comment that I wanted to make, that I note that go forward in future budgets, there is a note that there may well be tax-based pressures coming forward in the 24 to 26 budget. So not this budget, which I appreciate. And I really just wanted to signal that personally, I would have a hard time supporting a tax-based increase around this, and would hope that we could find some way within the rental housing fees themselves to make up what we need to. So just wanted to signal that to staff.
Thank you. Mayor McCabe?
Yeah, I just, on the recommendation with the 3.5% increase, I just, I have a question and a concern about that rate of increase, particularly given the affordable housing challenges and times that we're in, and wondering if we could propose an alternative recommendation if there's a seconder for that.
What are you suggesting as an alternative motion?
Somewhere in the range more of 1% or less.
So if I understand correctly, we're looking at item 2, that council approval rental housing rate increase for 2023 around, did you say 1%?
0 to 1%.
0 to 1%. So
rather than the 3.5%.
do you have a preference?
No, I'd be interested to hear council's input on that.
Did anyone have an opinion with regard to this?
I mean, I guess it would impact number 5 there, in terms of the
Yes, it will.
the deficit position, which it would extend it I understand it would extend it to 2031 rather than 2027. So that is probably important for you to know as well.
Yeah, if you'd like to speak to it, Councillor Vasic, that'd be great.
I just have I have questions. Should I ask questions now, or should we? Yeah.
I mean, we can do one of two things. We can put a motion on the table and ask questions on the motion. I think, if I understand correctly, the mayor's trying to get a sense of whether council has a willingness to change that number. And if you wanted to ask a question to better deduce your sense of, feeling around that, then please do. So go ahead.
If other people I have to make sense of my question, so I need a second.
Okay.
Sorry. Is that okay? If others have questions first, they could go.
Well, I'm happy to ask a question to the director of bylaw. If council were to reduce that number, yes, it would extend out the item 6 or
Item
5. But I guess for me, I actually feel more comfortable about not increasing them this year, because there's so much happening with regard to unsheltered more broadly in Waterloo region. And I just feel that this is a really small piece of the puzzle that we could do as a council to perhaps keep more units on the market at a slightly more affordable rate. And perhaps you could speak to that.
Through you, Chair. I can't speak to the specifics in terms of the impacts. I can speak today to a little bit about the extension and if council is willing to extend it in terms of it being an enterprise, rental housing being an enterprise, and sort of the implications of those drops for that support, and to extend our deficit in the reserve from the original deadline.
Please go ahead and.
So just in terms, and I do have Kim here to give me a hand just with some of the financials we sort of calculated with this. So in terms of decreasing it to 0%, that revenue loss would be in the neighborhood of 37,829, and extend the deficit beyond, or extend being in the reserve to around 2031, I believe, for that one, for 0%. With our original projection, we have been recovering the program since the pandemic. Challenging times, our enforcement efforts were directed elsewhere, noting the concern of the community in terms of rental housing. The program is sort of in place for safety and ensuring safe housing. So that's sort of a brief outline, but it's really just if council's comfortable extending our reserve deficit for a longer period of time as we recover and slowly move forward.
So that would also mean continued tax-supported dollars, as Councillor Bodley was asking about, right?
We are receiving some Safe Start funding as well to assist us in this transition, and that was noted in the report. Beyond that, we would have to look at other support means.
Well, it's okay. Thanks, Nicole. I just wanted to point out that in the reserve right now, we have $100,000 each year from 2024 to 2026 of tax-based assistance, that if we take that away, that is going to make the reserve fall into a deeper deficit. So we wouldn't even be solvent by 2031 or 32. It would be much, much worse than that. So if we're not looking to increase the fees and we're not looking for tax-based support, we're putting the program in trouble. We're under-resourcing it because, we are going to get so deep in a deficit in the reserve that we're not going to be able to climb out of it. So that's why we had proposed tax-based support for 3 years that's in the reserve in the report right now, to help us slowly climb out of that deficit that we're in right now, to eventually get solvent when we can get some more units like license sales over that period of time. But if we don't do that and we take away the tax-based support and we crush fee increases, we're really strangling our revenue, and it would be very difficult to have a solvent program at that point in time. So that's what would happen.
I think too, just to put it in perspective, the program fees on average work out to about $25 to $30 a month for rental property owners when they're renewing their license. Just to put a little bit of a perspective on that, if that helps.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Councillor Bathwick.
Yeah, thank you. That was one of my questions, but because I can't recall the table, but it showed a relatively modest increase. So I'm curious about how much of a dent it will make for affordable housing. And then my second question is, I love the idea and I love the intent behind it. So, but is there any way that if we kind of took that risk as a municipality, that we would be able to enforce in some way that landlords didn't increase their rent by that much? Like, they can still increase their rents, sometimes I feel like, or it seems like the thought is, if we have the rental licensing or the rental license, if we didn't have that, then all of a sudden we'd have more affordable units. But is there any way that we can say, well, we're not going to increase it, so you also as a landlord can't increase it? So do we have any safeguards in place to actually say that that's going to? Okay, thanks.
So through you, Chair, the increase in rent is dictated by the province. So that is something through the Residential Tenancies Act. We believe that, the program is in place. The benefits of the program include like annual gas and oil inspections and some inspections to ensure safe housing. And I think that is sort of the main point of the program, is to ensure safe housing, whether it be affordable or not affordable housing. It's a general safety mechanism for all. And my belief is that affordable housing should be very, very safe as well.
Yes, I guess I'm just trying to understand if not doing the increase in this way that is proposed in the recommendation will have any bearing on whether or not it's affordable. Like, would save, like, if there's this increase, will the landlords increase the rent by $20 a month, for example, in order to cover these costs?
They're only permitted through the province to increase their rent. I believe it's 2.5% now per
Right,
year.
thank you.
So
You did answer that. Yeah, no, thank you.
Okay. Did you have another question,
Well,
Councillor Wright?
sorry, did you have a
Yeah.
question?
I just have a comment to make that I think quality of housing and the enforcement capabilities in the program are really important, especially for those who are low income and need access to this kind of rental housing. And what we've seen also in terms of, in a related issue on development charges don't actually end up reducing the cost of housing in neighboring communities that actually have lower development charges. So I would say the same thing is applicable here, where it's already provincially regulated, but we do actually need the program itself.
Okay, so if I understand what I'm hearing, it sounds like there's maybe broad support for the motion as it's existing, currently printed. So, am I reading the room wrong?
Well, I
Okay.
was just going to note that there's no seconder, so I think
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
probably
Well,
reading
it
the room
actually didn't
correctly.
get on
That's
the
okay.
floor. So, yeah. So, would you like to move the motion as printed?
Sure. Yeah, I'll move the motion as printed.
Seconder? Yeah, Councillor Rowe. All those in favor? So that's carried. Thank you very much. And I appreciate the conversation. Admittedly, I was the one who asked the mayor to consider bringing that forward because I wanted to have a conversation about that and whether we thought that it affected access to affordability. So, all right. So that now brings us on to staff reports. And our first staff report is the 2023 proposed budget. And so I'll look to the staff team who are bringing forth this presentation. But before they do that, the mayor has some comments to make, and then I have some comments to make. So I just wanted to start with Mayor McCabe.
Thank you very much, Councillor Freeman. And just some quick remarks that although we are very much early in our term as council, as a new council, we're kicking off one of the most important activities that we are going to do over our term in council. So as staff present the 2023 budget, we just need to keep in mind that this is the main tool that will allow us to implement the strategic plan and enable staff to deliver the programs and services that our community expects. So before staff do provide that overview, I would like to pass it back over to Councillor Freeman to provide a few introductory comments. Thank you so much for accepting the chair position in this.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you, Council, for being here today and staff for all your hard work on the budget. In a few minutes, members of our finance team will be sharing highlights of the proposed 2023 city budget. Drafting a budget is always a monumental task as staff try to create a budget that strives to balance ongoing commitments and needs of the community while also considering the potential impacts of increases. We are mindful that we are living in challenging economic times. I first joined council in 2006. This is the first city budget that is so severely impacted by inflation rates, which are at their highest level in decades. In addition, as we saw again last week, interest rates are continuing to increase. Demand for city services and programs are increasing. New provincial legislation, in particular Bill 23, will have a significant financial impact on all municipalities. While staff have calculated some preliminary projections, the full impact of Bill 23 will not be known until we see all of the details in the regulations. The 2023 budget is for 1 year and is positioned to continue to implement the priorities of Council's strategic plan. The strategic plan sets the foundation for the budget process as it identifies the highest priorities for the city and outlines actions necessary to reach those goals. The current strategic plan will guide the 2023 budget and business plans. In 2023, Council will be creating the next 4-year strategic plan that will identify and direct the priorities for the following 4 years. That plan will provide the foundation for the 2023 to 2025 3-year budget. The 2023 budget provides a measured, hopeful, and progressive approach under the theme of building a strong and sustainable community together. Open and transparent government remains a priority for Council and staff. In January, City staff will be presenting the 2023 business plans for each division. Citizens are encouraged to participate in these discussions. The City also recently completed a citizen telephone survey in which direct budget questions were asked. The results of the survey will help to inform the Council decision-making. On January 10th, 2023, from 6:30 till 8 p.m., a hybrid budget information session will be held at the Waterloo Memorial Recreation Complex Community Pavilion. Citizen voices are important to the budget process. To help facilitate participation in the January 10th session, the City will provide free on-site childcare. In addition, the City will cover the cost of public transportation for anyone who is able to attend. Pre-registration is required and more details can be found at the City website. The City of Waterloo faces challenges related to price escalation as evidenced by sharp rises in all inflationary indices, with the most current Canadian price index nearing 7% and non-residential construction price index at 15%, which affects many of our construction tenders. We are faced with other critical pressures, including but not limited to increased climate change investment to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, increasing the availability and supply of affordable housing in our community, continuing to address our infrastructure gap, and investing in services that enhance our community, all while keeping affordability in mind when setting budget priorities. Shortly, staff will provide highlights of the proposed operating and capital budgets. Embedded in the budget are ongoing savings by staff to identify efficiencies and improvements with a goal of trying to minimize the financial impact to citizens of Waterloo. As of 3 p.m. today, Council and the public will have access to all budget documents. After today, there will be 5 more budget-related Council meetings in January and February, and an additional public meeting on January 10th, 2023. To my Council colleagues, there will be many opportunities in the weeks ahead to ask questions and to better understand the details of the proposed budgets. In other words, don't feel like you have to have all your questions in your mind's eye today. There will be many, many opportunities to ask questions at whatever level of detail will help you to make a very informed decision. And with that being said, I would like to turn it over to staff.
Thank you. Chair Freeman, mayors of council, public, members, our media, and staff. Good afternoon, and thank you for having us. I am here today along with our Manager of Financial Planning, Brad Witzel, to take you through, as Chair Freeman indicated, the highlights of the proposed budget. There is a report that has just been released moments ago that you have not had a chance to review as yet, which is a summary of the budget. And it does include a couple of recommendations for your consideration today, which we will be going through with you. But most of it is simply for information as you start your journey along the budget deliberation process. That budget summary report, as well as this presentation, does not have a comprehensive list of everything in the budget. That will be in your documents, which we will take you through where to find those and how to navigate those. So Brad will be doing that, as well as taking you through a small tutorial to help out with that. And as you know and noted, there are many people across the organization in all divisions at various levels who have been involved in the budget process. Brad and I are summarizing it on behalf of all of those dedicated individuals today. So the 2023 budget is a one-year budget, and it positions the city to continue to implement the priorities of Council's currently approved strategic plan. The theme of the budget is building a strong and sustainable community together through four main goals: support for our existing programs and services, operating funding to support new capital assets and growth, continued increased investment in infrastructure renewal, and service delivery enhancements and additions as supported by the strategic plan, with emphasis on climate change, affordable housing, and equity, diversity, and inclusion. Chair Freeman, you did go through some of these dates, so I won't spend too much time on them, but the essence of the message is that there are a number of touch points for Council and the public between now and February 13th, and at that time, on February the 13th, we'll be seeking approval from Council. On the public engagement and communications plan front, Chair Freeman, you mentioned the survey that has been launched and that has wrapped up, and so we're reviewing and analyzing those results. Then we will also be conducting the hybrid public engagement session on January the 10th, as indicated. And the engagement results from both of those pieces will be summarized for Council and brought back on January the 30th. The public, of course, is welcome to attend in person or via live stream any of the upcoming 5 budget-related Council meetings in January and February as well. I know you've seen this before, but it's always helpful to understand how local government fits in to the bigger picture. In 2021, the average family in Ontario with 2 or more individuals earned approximately $129,872 and paid $50,582 in total taxes to federal, provincial, and local governments combined, according to research by the Fraser Institute. 90% of the tax revenue went to federal and provincial governments, which is over $45,000 of the $50,582. The remaining $5,000 or so, or 10%, went to local government and education. And of that $5,000, the lower tier municipality received $1,543, or 3%. And so put differently, the City of Waterloo and other local municipalities, lower tier municipalities or single, receive approximately 3 cents of every tax dollar collected by all levels of government combined. And yet, local government owns more infrastructure than the federal and provincial governments, and the services and programs that local government provide touches taxpayers and ratepayers directly each and every day. And so how do we deliver on council's vision despite these challenges? We do it through our strategic plan, through council's strategic plan, through best practice research, public engagement, interaction with our municipal counterparts, and community partners. And we use the Strategic Plan Foundation to develop studies and master plans, which we then use to build our divisional business plans, feeding into our budget and our priorities. This one-year budget is based on the existing strategic plan, as Chair Freeman noted earlier. But of course, as Council embarks on a new strategic plan process in 2023, the outcomes of that will very much shape the next budget, the 3-year budget. We also deliver on Council's vision through continuous improvement, which leads to efficiencies, savings, and identifying other sources of revenue. In the 2023 budget, we have included $1.3 million of these such improvements that have an impact of 1.5%. Without these measures, the tax increase would be 1.5% higher than what is being proposed. And efficiencies and improvements have been critical to the City of Waterloo over the past 10 years to keep taxes as low as possible. In fact, we have included $11 million in such improvements over the past 10 years. Some of the most important improvements and innovations may not be the biggest, do not always translate directly into budget savings, but rather build capacity to deliver more work, to improve the quality of work, or to result in future cost avoidance. And some examples of these innovations are the electric robotic mower that can operate 24/7 and has improved the turf and service level quality at the cricket field, and recent conversions of building inspection fleet and municipal enforcement vehicles from gas to electric. And there are many, many more great innovations and improvements that are listed in Appendix A within the Council report that Council will have an opportunity to review in the weeks ahead. Our internal budget deliberation process is guided by the CMT and OLT Budget Committee. For 2023, the committee is made up of 14 individuals representing all 4 departments, as you can see. The committee sets strategy, provides direction, reviews policy, and develops targets. And they do this and communicate these things to the organization through the directors, onto managers and staff, who then submit budget requests and project sheets for review and consideration by the Budget Committee. The departments and the committee prioritize the submissions, and ultimately they develop the budget for Council's consideration. This process is iterative. It starts early in the calendar year and progresses through to the September-October timeframe, with documentation finalization then taking place and leading to the release of information to you today. So let's dive into our 4 operating budget categories. And they closely align with the 4 main goals we talked about earlier. And so we have our base budget requests, and these are those that maintain current service level. So for example, increasing the budget for road salt as a result of price escalation. Then we have operating impacts of capital and growth. Capital projects may result in greater day-to-day expenses. So for example, you expand the footprint of a facility, it may result in increased custodial service. This category also deals with growth. So as our population grows, costs go up to deliver services to more people. For example, we have a growth component built in to the funding that we provide to the library on an annual basis to take account for population growth. Service level changes These are increases or decreases to existing service levels or for new services. So for example, the relatively new Indigenous Initiatives Anti-Racism, Accessibility and Equity team is requesting funding in order to establish their service level. And infrastructure investment are increases recommended by the long-term financial plan to address the city's infrastructure funding gap. So why are these categories important? It helps the administration and staff and council understand the investments in the terms of these 4 goals. And it also aligns with our policy with respect to property tax increases and our guideline with respect to that, which I'll explain in a moment. We have a council-approved policy. It's FC019 called the Core Consumer Price Index. And Core Consumer Price Index for short is CPIX. And what it states is that CPIX will act as a guideline for property tax setting. Staff will strive to keep increases as close to inflation as possible for the base budget and operating impacts of capital, that we will use the September 12-month rolling average of the Core Consumer Price Index as documented by the Bank of Canada, and that service level changes and infrastructure investment would be for council consideration above and beyond that. Like many organizations, the City of Waterloo faces challenges related to price escalation as a result of the sharp rises in inflation. And certainly that could not be more true than what has been experienced in the last year. We can see the steady increase in CPI and CPIX in 2022 as shown by these first 2 lines. And CPIX, as I mentioned, as the Core Consumer Price Index, is a more moderate view of inflation because CPI is 600 various good products and services that the average household consumes, and CPIX removes the 8 most volatile items from that 600 basket of goods. And so that is things like fruits and vegetable, fuel, tobacco, and a few more. And so those first 2 lines, that first line shows that in September, CPI was at nearly 7% at 6.9, CPIX at 6, and the bottom line, the dark blue line, is the 12-month rolling average of CPIX. And so it is an even more moderate version of the spot rate of CPIX. And in September, the 12-month rolling average was 5.2%. And that number is particularly relevant as it relates to the policy I just showed you on the previous screen. So we'll keep that number in mind, and we'll go back to the policy. The 12-month rolling average is 5.2, and the proposed increase for this piece of base and operating impacts of capital is 3.9. For additional conversation for council are service level changes and infrastructure investment at 1.45%. And so the total is 5.35% for consideration, which is made up of 3.9 for base and operating impacts of capital, and 1% for infrastructure, and 0.45% for service level changes. Bear in mind, this does include the $1.3 million of efficiencies and improvements. Otherwise, this figure would be closer to 6.8% instead of 5.35%. The impact to the average property tax bill for the year will be just under $75, or approximately $6.25 a month. How do we compare to our neighbors? The City of Waterloo had the second lowest approved property tax increase out of the 8 municipalities in Waterloo Region last year. In the operating budget book that has just been released, you will also see how the City of Waterloo compares to other types of housing. And this is prepared by a third party called BMA Management Consulting. And so you will see some different types of housing and how Waterloo and other cities in Ontario compare. As far as the 2023 budget goes, the other municipalities within our region are also in the midst of preparing their budgets. Some have released preliminary information. Most are having their initial budget meetings today and later this week or in January. And a large majority are seeking approval between February 13th and February 23rd. And so we're sharing this for council's awareness. So I'd like to now take you through some of the operating budget highlights. And we will do this through our 4 categories. So the first category, which is support for existing programs and services, our base budget. Some of the highlights are funding to cover the inflationary impacts of rising fuel and increased salt supply contract unit pricing so that trails, sidewalks, bike lanes, and roads remain safe in the winter from elements. And for context, Council, the city is responsible for clearing 169 kilometers of sidewalks and trails within the city, which is about 25% of the inventory. And this has increased by about 5% in recent years. Another highlight is the Director of Strategic Initiatives that is being recommended. And this position would lead and develop the implementation of the strategic plan, the Lean Six Sigma program, cultivate key partnerships and advocacy with government agencies, as well as lead the ever-important approach to sustainability and climate action, housing, and homelessness. Another highlight is QP traffic technicians. And these positions would coordinate traffic calming programs, road closures, conduct inspections, install signage, and assist with winter operations. Highlights about the operating funding to support new capital and growth. Some include the Waterloo Public Library annual funding being increased by a share of growth so that the library can continue to deliver great services as the population increases. Funding to run additional vehicles and equipment, including the new Vector truck in city utilities, which allows more precise and safer excavations around buried utilities and other important works. And then from an infrastructure perspective, I know Council remembers the presentation last week made by Cassandra Pacey. This proposed increase of 1%, which equates to about $870,000, will go towards helping to reduce the current $28 million annual average funding gap on tax-based assets. As context, in 2020 and as part of the 3-year budget, Council approved the first of 3 consecutive additional dedicated infrastructure investments with the intention to continue annually increasing the investment. And so this proposed 1% is this year's recommendation to continue to slowly and methodically chip away at that gap. And the 4th section is for service delivery enhancements and additions as supported by the strategic plan. And some highlights here are the Indigenous Initiatives, Anti-Racism, Accessibility and Equity Strategic Implementation Program funding to build community support to address accessibility, equity, and Indigenous reconciliation involving extensive engagement of equity-deserving groups. Another highlight is funding for a community program to support DEI, including fee assistance, grant programming for House of Friendship, and Corizon, I always get this wrong. Corizon, older adult programs, and DEI with respect to museum programs and exhibits that we are planning to deliver. And funding to increase support to the Affordable Housing Grant Program and strategy. So these are some of the proposed operating investments for Council's consideration. The rest of your items are in the budget documents and in much more detail. And at this time, I will pass it over to Brad Witzel, who will cover the capital budget highlights and where to find the documents. Thanks, Brad.
Thank you, Philippa, and Mayor and members of council. I'll walk through the next few slides, which will provide an overview of the capital budget, and then I'll go into detail where you can find the 2023 budget documents. The proposed capital program for 2023, move the slide, contains 196 capital projects with a total value of $113 million. 162 of those projects are classified as routine with a value of $50 million, and 34 of those projects are classified as non-routine with a value of $63 million. Staff will provide more information on the capital reporting criteria in the budget meetings ahead, but projects classified as routine are approved by Council on Budget Day, February 13th, and may proceed after that approval. Projects classified as non-routine will be approved on Budget Day, but must return to Council with a more detailed funding release report before the project can actually begin. On February 6th, which is referred to as Capital Review Day, Council will have the opportunity to ask any capital-related questions and may also change the reporting classification of any project from routine to non-routine. This slide will provide a quick visual of the proposed 2023 capital program by the strategic pillars. While infrastructure renewal is our most significant priority within the capital program, valued at $63.1 million, as you can see, there are capital investments planned for all pillars. Staff also include a 9-year capital forecast for a full 10-year capital outlook, but will only be seeking approval of the 2023 budget of Council. Some key capital investments include increased affordable housing funding under the Affordable Housing Strategy and Button Factory Universal Washer. Additional key investments focused on climate change include an EV charging station program and new trails citywide. Numerous infrastructure rehabilitation and expansion projects are also planned, with some examples including the roofing replacement program, cybersecurity enhancements, and Alexandra Park, to name a few. As noted in the budget summary report, our development charges bylaw is effective until December 31st, 2024, and can continue to be relied upon for the 2023 capital budget. Staff encourage Council to focus on the 2023 DC capital program, knowing that the 2024 to 2032 DC capital forecast is likely to change as a result of the approved legislation, which staff continue to review and plan to address as part of next year's 3-year budget process covering 2024 to 2026. Later today, Joel Cotter and Philippa Reynolds will provide more details in regards to Bill 23. So in terms of budget documents, we refer to the 4 key budget documents as the proposed budget summary report, which Council just received moments ago, and we appreciate will take time to review in the weeks ahead. But we're hopeful that this report will provide a general overview of the budget and will be a helpful resource as you are reviewing the budget in greater detail. The 2023 business plan is another key budget document, along with the 2023 proposed operating budget book and the 2023 proposed capital budget book and capital forecast covering the periods of 2024 to 2032. All 2023 key budget documents can be found on our website at waterloo.ca/budget. They are located under the Documents, Reports, and Plans section. At the end of the presentation, I'll provide a brief tutorial of where we can locate these documents and how they work together. So after reviewing the budget summary report, the first key budget document to review would be the business plans. From a budget perspective, the business plans will include a department, operating, and capital summary. At the divisional level, the business plans will include a similar operating and capital summary, but will also include the operating budget references and the capital project references included for ease of navigating between the business plans and the more detailed budget documents. And lastly, each key initiative identified for 2023 by the areas will also have the corresponding budget information added for council and public reference. So the next document is the operating budget book. The operating budget book has been organized into 7 sections and will include breakdown of items including the proposed operating by our strategic priority areas, by budget categories which Felipe touched on earlier, the average household impact, and local comparators, to name a few. The proposed operating items are listed on the various schedules, with Schedule 1 being the tax-based proposed items, Schedule 4 being the city utility proposed items, Schedule 5 being the other enterprises proposed items. Other enterprises include parking or building standards, to name a few. And each of these items is supported by a more detailed budget request. Schedule 3 in the operating budget book is referred to as the menu list. This schedule will list other pressures outside of the proposed budget, along with further reduction opportunities for council decision-making in February as part of the final budget approval. Council may also bring forward any other adjustments for consideration as part of the menu process. So the next key budget document to review is the capital budget book. The capital budget book includes all 2023 capital projects, along with the 2024 to 2032 capital forecast. The capital budget book will also include a summary by strategic priority areas, by department and division, a summary by funding sources, along with a summary by reporting criteria. So as noted earlier, all key budget documents are located on our website. All the supporting budget documents, including budget request or project sheets, are located on CoreShare and can also be accessed via our website under the Documents, Reports, and Plans section. In a few slides, I'll provide an overview of how council and the public can find more information on the noted example on this slide, B22, winter control salt increase, which Felipe also mentioned earlier. In terms of capital, all the detailed capital project sheets are also available on CoreShare, and on the next slide I'll provide an example of how council or the public could find this noted example project sheet reference 283. So I'll now provide a brief tutorial of the budget documents, where they're located and how they work together. So at this point, I'd just like to take a quick moment to acknowledge the work of our partners in communications. They've done an amazing job working with us to revise the budget webpage. We've tried to increase HTML content on the webpage for improved accessibility, and also just the overall look and feel and design of the webpage. And so a big shout out to Tony and the communications team. They've been great partners in this journey, so hopefully council and the public agree, but we're interested in feedback on ways we could improve for future budgets. So the documents that I referred to are located under the Documents, Reports, and Plans section. And you can see them organized here. And so for the example, I'm going to open the business plans document. And on page 173 of the business plan, under the Transportation Services section, you will find budget reference B22. So that, at this view, it's only the reference number, and you may not know what that pertains to. So to find additional information on that budget request, we would go back to the documents, reports, and plans section, and under view our budget resource folder, it will take us into Core Share. I'm just going to retry that. It should just take us into there. So if that happens when you're accessing it as well, Council, just close it and retry, as you do not need to log in. So under the operating budget requests, there's various information, but what we're looking for today is the 2023 operating budget requests. And in this case, under the operating budget request document, it will pull them up. And for this, we'll just do a search for B22, and we'll find the supporting information for this budget request. So that's how we would navigate between the budget, between the business plan and the operating budget document. So for an alternative example now under capital, I'll show how we can navigate to capital project reference 283. So for this example, we'll just open up the bookmarks that are included within the documents for ease of navigating. And this particular project is located under Community Services, Municipal Enforcement. So going to the Municipal Enforcement section of the business plan, under the capital summary, we'll see reference 283 under the capital summary. And again, the detail at the business plan level is just the reference number. So if we go back to Core Share, in this case, we're going to go to capital and open up project sheets. And this is under Community Services, capital project sheets. And it'll be a similar view that we just looked at with the operating budget request. But for this example, what I'd suggest is you could do as an alternative way of finding a document is to download a local copy. And if we open that up, the ribbon or bookmark function will now be available for Council or the public. And you can see project reference 283 e-bikes. Council would also be able to make any notes or anything that they would like to on the documents. So that wraps up the brief tutorial, but hopefully as you start working with the documents, it's easy to navigate and find all the references that you're looking for. I'm gonna So thank you for your time today. We hope this presentation was helpful as Council begins their review of the various budget documents leading to budget consideration in February. As noted earlier, the budget summary report was just released today and will hopefully be a helpful resource as you undertake your budget review in the weeks ahead. The report does have a few high-level recommendations, which we'll leave on the screen for Council's consideration today. But as a reminder, no operating or capital budget approvals are being sought today. That will occur in February. Later today, probably in a few moments, Council will be requested to consider the approval of the 2023 city utility rates. And earlier today, Council will have approved the 2023 rates for the other enterprise areas from the consent packet and then the items that were considered afterwards. So at this time, Philippe and I would be happy to answer any questions that Council may have and go from there. So thank you very much. Appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Brad and Philippa. Lots of information, Council. I'm certainly happy to receive questions, but if you'd like to hold your questions, that's okay too. It is kind of like drinking through a fire hose the first time you get a budget presentation. And seeing no questions, I think we're going to move on then to the next pieces because the reserve and reserve funds are an important piece to the budget and understanding how we're funding some of our capital programs and other things. And so I think we're going to move on to that, if that makes sense, Brad. Clerk, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Chair. If we could, there is a late starter recommendation for Council to consider this afternoon. It's the recommendation on the screen. And you will have received just a late electronic version of this report, and hard copies are coming.
shall we just take a short break while we get those hard copies, or does that make sense? It's really just about the budget schedule. So do people need a hard copy, or is the information on this screen suitable for making a decision around the budget schedule? Okay, that's moved by Councillor Bodley and seconded by Mayor McCabe. Any comments? All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. And just, I think it goes without say, but honestly, staff have been working on this budget for a year. In addition, for many staff, and we're running an election. And so this delivery of this budget today represents a huge load that has been carried by staff over the last year. So thank you very much for that. I know that I look forward to digging into the details. So with that being said, I'm going to ask Julie if she'd like to come forth with regard to the reserves and reserve funds. So welcome.
Thank you. The presentation is So good afternoon, council, staff, and residents. My name is Julie Coppicer, and I'm a financial analyst here at the City of Waterloo. I'm here today to provide a bit of background on the city's reserves and reserve funds prior to council's consideration of the Reserve and Reserve Fund annual update report, which is on today's agenda. So what is the difference between a reserve fund and a reserve? Reserve funds are governed by legislation or formal agreements in addition to the council-approved policy. And the balances within reserve funds earn interest annually. They fall under two categories: obligatory reserve funds, which are required and restricted by provincial legislation or agreements, and discretionary reserve funds, which are restricted by municipal bylaws. Reserves are established by council-approved policy only and do not earn interest. So what are reserves and reserve funds used for? Reserves and reserve funds are often thought of as rainy day funds, but the use of our reserves and reserve funds is really much more varied than that. Reserves and reserve funds are actually important financial planning tools, which provide the city with the flexibility to plan for the replacement and rehabilitation of our existing assets, as well as for the purchase and construction of new assets. They support the provision of a wide variety of municipal services and provide tax stability. They provide the flexibility to manage the city's future debt levels and plan for the retirement of existing debt levels. They also provide contingency funding. Reserves and reserve funds therefore support a large amount of what we do as a municipality. And it is important that we use a strategic approach to reserve and reserve fund management to make the best use of the financial resources, to ensure we have the right tools. To that end, Council has made strategic changes to our reserves and reserve funds that have provided a basis to address the city's needs over the long term and to support the work of the long-term financial plan. Some of those changes include the consolidation and reorganization of a number of reserves and reserve funds to provide greater funding flexibility, pool risk, and minimize administration. Creating separate reserve funds for growth and rehabilitation to better facilitate the planning for and reporting of these competing needs. Reviewing contribution levels to determine whether current allocations to our reserves and reserve funds are appropriate for future needs. Increasing contributions for rehabilitation to begin the process of addressing the infrastructure funding gap. Managing target levels finding the right balance between ensuring that sustainable funding exists and minimizing the need to access contingency funding, while also ensuring funding is not sitting idle, and improving reserve and reserve fund and financial control policies. With the importance of reserve and reserve funds in mind, the graph on the left, which reflects the city's current 10-year projection of the total reserves and reserve funds and shows the balance entering a negative position beginning in 2025, may be concerning. The graph on the right helps us to understand the driving factor behind that projection. The top line reflects the total reserves and reserve funds projection excluding development charge reserve funds, and as you can see, has a more positive trend. Let's have a closer look then at the development charges reserve fund projection. While the proposed capital budget and the reserve and reserve funds report forecast for a projection period of 10 years, the approved 2019 development charges background study forecasted over a much longer projection period out to 2041. For many of the DC services, expenses were planned to be incurred earlier in the projection and to be recovered over the latter part of the projection. Therefore, in looking at only the 10-year window, we're not seeing the planned DC recovery reflected. This graph shows the full projection period for development charges. The thicker blue line reflects the original projection, from the approved 2019 background study. At that time, it was anticipated that we would enter a negative position beginning in 2020 and growing until 2026, before balances would then begin to recover over the remainder of the projection out to 2041. It's important to remember that the background study is an analysis done at a point in time, and actual activity will differ. The orange thinner line reflects the changes to the DC program projection that have occurred since the approval of the 2019 background study, such as changes in project timing, project scope, costs, and inflation. As you can see, due to project deferrals, the DC reserve funds did not enter a negative position in 2020. Instead, that is projected to occur in 2024. Similarly, the projected recovery of the negative balance has also shifted by a few years. The full DC recovery would now be projected beyond 2041. Increasing costs and inflation have also impacted the magnitude of the projected balance recovery needed. It is also important to note that the main driver of the expenditures in the early part of the projection is one project, the Beaver Creek Road and Conservation Drive reconstruction project, currently budgeted over 2023 to 2025 for a total of $68 million. However, the timing of this project is not yet fixed, as the project is dependent upon various factors, including development. The city needs to be prepared to have the funds available for the project when development warrants moving forward, but the timing is difficult to predict. As part of the February 6, 2023 capital review, as part of the February 6, 2023 capital review meeting with council, staff may flag some potential DC project deferrals to help manage the financial impacts of Bill 23. As was mentioned in the earlier presentation, Bill 23, More Homes Built Faster Act, recently received royal assent on November 28th. This bill will impact both the projects that can be funded by development charges as well as the development charges revenue that can be collected. Therefore, this change, along with all of the others that I outlined, will need to be taken into consideration when work begins on the next development charges background study, update, and as part of the 24 to 2026 capital budget. Additional information regarding Bill 23 will be presented later today. Now that I've spoken about what has been done to date, as well as where the reserve and reserve fund projections may go in the future, and the factors that can influence that, I would like to finish my presentation by highlighting what staff are recommending for council approval today. On September 26, council approved the community benefits strategy and bylaw, including the establishment of a new community benefits charges reserve fund. A policy to govern the use of the reserve fund has been included with the report for council's consideration today. It is also recommended that a climate action reserve fund be established through the closeout of the Green Initiatives program within the Capital Reserve Fund, as well as through the reallocation of a portion of the annual Capital Reserve Fund contribution. Establishing this source will allow the city to budget for projects that positively impact climate mitigation and adaptation, in alignment with the council-approved greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets of 50% by 2030 and 80% by 2050. A policy for this reserve fund has been included with today's report. And lastly, staff are also recommending the consolidation of funding that has been earmarked for library needs into one reserve fund, the Library Expansion Reserve Fund, as well as an administrative update to the policy wording of the Parking Reserve Fund to clarify the capital nature of the expenditures incurred. The full recommendations for today's report are listed here on my final slide for your consideration, and that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Council, I wanted to turn it over and look for questions on this report. Okay, seeing none, we have a recommendation here. I'd like to see if I have a mover and a seconder for that recommendation. Moved by Councillor Bodley, seconded by Councillor Vasic. All in favor? Mayor? Yep. As that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you very much. So now we're on to item C, which is the city utilities and the 2023 rates. So I just wanted to remind council that these particular rates actually feed into the budget system. So we are in a way making an important decision today with regard to a key input into the budget work that we're doing. And with that, I'd like to invite staff, Lee and Michael, if you'd like to, you have a presentation, I think, that you'd like to share with us. So welcome here.
Thank you, Chair Freeman, Mayor, and councillors, and all of our rate-paying residents, businesses, institutions, and public that are here today and watching and part of this important...
Can I just, sorry to interrupt, may I just trouble you to raise the podium a little bit and just get a wee bit closer to the mic? I know that I'm having a little challenge hearing you, so
how's that?
Others
Is that better?
That's much better.
Sorry.
Thank you so much.
Well, I just started off with some thank yous. So thank you, Chair Freeman and Mayor and councillors and all of our public, including our rate-paying residents and businesses and institutions, of course. And today we thank you for the opportunity to come talk about our 2023 city utilities rates. And with me today is Michael Pugliese, who's our financial analyst in the finance division. So we'll be co-presenting this today. And next slide, please. Actually, I don't know whether I can. Oh, I can control it myself. Excellent. All right. So what we wanted to talk about, first slide, is the rate setting objectives. So what are all these the rates and what we're looking at? What are we trying to do with them? We're really trying to achieve a sustainable and stable funding to achieve regulatory and customer requirements for all of the infrastructure classes, which is water, wastewater, and stormwater. And to be clear, there's no revenue from property taxes that are involved in any of the finances that you're going to see today. These are all direct rates that are separate from taxes. We're also looking to provide investment in infrastructure, ensuring that it's continued it continues to be in good service and high reliability for everybody that needs water, wastewater, and stormwater services. We're looking to maintain reserves at or near council approved targets, and that directly relates to the presentation that you've just seen. A big contribution from these rates goes into the reserves, so that's a key. We're not talking about separate money when we're talking about the city utilities budgets overall. We're looking to address significant investment required for stormwater infrastructure in the coming years. And I think one important note about what the city has done in the past is establish a stormwater utility, which is an independent section that is, it has its own essentially financial tracking and budgets. And that's very important when we think about climate change and the potential for climate change impacts to be felt within the city. And that's, obviously flooding events, there's many impacts that we've seen, even in the last 2 years. I've only been at the city myself for about 2.5 years. And I think in 2021, we had some very significant storms, like 25-year storms. And we noticed flooding within the city. And these are all impacts that we're going to continue to see. These are not going away. And I think we need to be, we need to have that ability to really look at this climate change impact and the solutions in a bucket that can be separated. So, and the last is really the long-term rate forecast that incorporates the capital financing strategy, as you've just heard in the previous presentation, to address all of the infrastructure needs, and that's also guided by the city's asset management plan. So what we like to do within all of the capital spending is to use that asset management planning to really guide how do we best use the money that we need to spend to upgrade all that infrastructure. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Mike for the next several slides.
All right, thanks, Lee. I'll just take council through some of the financial items related to the report and the rates. First thing I did want to note, though, with respect to the recommendation to approve the rates for 2023, by council approving the rates, we're not asking for any approvals of any of the budget requests that are part of the package that Brad and Philippe took us through. They're done separately. So by approving the rate now, the budget requests modeled into the rates, and the budget requests are still approved in February. And if something changes significantly that would alter the recommended rate, staff would come back in February to adjust the rates accordingly. And this goes for the region of Waterloo rates as well. So we budget based on what the region's forecasting their rates to be. And they're currently going through their budgeting process. If those wholesale water and wastewater rates turn out significantly different than what we've modeled, again, we'll come back to council in February to adjust accordingly, again, if material. If they're not material, then we would just kind of proceed as recommended in this report here. So for 2023, the overall budget is about $69 million for city utilities. That's all three sections. Of that total, through the pie chart, you can see just over 51% of that is paid to the region of Waterloo for wastewater treatment and supply of drinking water. And those fees are set by the region through wholesale rates and guided by their budgeting process. So that's a cost of goods sold for the city that we have to pass through to the region through our rates. 23% goes towards the daily operational and administration of the city utility sections, so water, wastewater, and stormwater sections. And then 27% of that, $69 million, goes towards funding the reserves for future capital, current and future capital reinvestment purposes. So the revenue budgeted from rates, so we have rates per cubic meter and fixed monthly fees. That budget is about $64 million for 2023, with additional $4.6 million budgeted from anticipated debenture financing for the water and stormwater sections. This chart in the report, I believe it's table 4 on page 10, takes us through a summary of the annual household impact. And this is a summary based on a residential medium tier for a stormwater charge, and based on using about 17 cubic meters of water per month with the standard residential water service. So the 2022 impact currently this year is about $1,158 overall. anticipated to go up to $1,217 in 2023. That's an increase of $59 overall, again, for that average household. That dollar amount will go up and down based on how much water is consumed in each individual household or unit. And what I've circled in blue there represents a breakdown between what the city is responsible for and what the region of Waterloo is responsible for through wholesale rates, as I noted. So of that $59, we've modeled $17.36 being the regional portion. That's about 1.5% of the 5.1 total. And then the other three portions are the city stormwater fee, then the monthly fixed service fee for water service, and then the water and sanitary charges on a per cubic meter basis. Those total about $41 overall and equate to about 3.6% of that total increase. This next chart is in the report as well. It's just a pictorial view of kind of how our neighbors within Waterloo region are comparing to the city of Waterloo. So each city is shown there. We've shown our proposed 2023 rates. We haven't shown any other municipalities as they're all going through the same process right now as well. But we have shown kind of that Waterloo's 2023 proposed is still quite reasonable compared to each other of our neighbors' current rates. And then the red lines just kind of represent a pictorial view of kind of the trajectory that those rates have taken over the last several years, flatter being less increases per year and steeper being a bit higher ones per year. And just for a note, the ones on the blue, so Wellesley Township and North Dumfries Township, their water distribution and treatment is all administered and billed by the region's Waterloo as well. So the region handles all their fees. That's why it's dark blue for both bars. And with the other ones, the light blue bars is the municipal portion, the lower tier portion, with the dark blue bars being the regional portion, which is why it's the same for each. Those wholesale rates are the same for Waterloo, Kitchener, Cambridge, and Woolwich. Looking at the stormwater comparison, it's a little more difficult because within the region of Waterloo, only Kitchener is the only other city that has a dedicated stormwater fee. So we've shown Kitchener's fees right next to ours. Again, we've shown Waterloo's proposed 2023 rates. But it's hard to compare these rates over jurisdictions. So we compare Guelph. There's other areas in Southern Ontario shown in this chart, but it really depends on the geographic nature of each city, their creek network, ponds, things like that. Some cities are prone to more stormwater related incidents and funding requirements, and others aren't. So it's hard to compare apples to apples with this slide, but we wanted to show just for broad spectrum what other areas around us are charging for stormwater fees per year. The next few slides will just touch on the reserve levels. As Julie just mentioned prior to us, these all fall under the reserve and reserve fund report and policies. So council, through our financial plan several years ago, had approved kind of a minimum and a target reserve levels. So this first one is the rate stabilization reserve, which is for operating impacts. So anything operationally through the year, surpluses or deficit on operational items would either be deposited to the reserve as surplus at year end, or if there's a shortfall, we'll be drawing from the reserve at year end. So again, provides stability so there's not drastic rate increases in future years if there's a big shortfall. And through our forecast for 2023 onwards, we're operating within that band. We're pretty much at the minimum target. Just given all the extra pressures that we've seen this year, we've had to try and balance out rate increases with reserve balances just to stay within our council approved guidelines. There's a bit of a dip on water in the forecast period, but we are trending back up to that forecast level by the end of the 10 years. This is the same view except for the capital reserves. So again, the capital reserves are dedicated for infrastructure renewal. These are governed by annual contributions by rates. So as I noted at the start, portion of the fees that are paid each year go to fund the reserve each year to pay for these capital programs. In the past, 2021 and 2022 are a bit higher because we've had some capital deferred into future years, but 2023 onwards, that is being utilized, and the rate model takes into account that we're chipping away at those reserve balances to help, again, offset the rates in the future. There's significant pressures to the water program over 27 to 31. Again, just unit cost increases, cost of PVC piping, things like that have put some pressure. So we've had to dip a bit below the minimum, but on an absolute dollar level, there's still it's quite healthy from a dollar perspective. Again, trending up to the end of the reserve, the forecast period. Stormwater is a little bit different. It's not guided by a percentage figure. It's governed by a dollar figure, not being at least a $1 million balance to to be above that for the stormwater reserve. And again, some projects have been deferred over time from 21 and 22, and that's why they've been reflected in the 2023 budget. And we're drawing down that reserve accordingly and trying to stay within that council mandated minimum. And again, we've had to use some debenture financing periodically through these forecast periods just to help maintain rate increases, so we're not increasing rates too high in any given year. We're trying to keep a smooth rate increase over time, and our debenture financing helps us achieve that. So I'll pass it back over to Lee to go through some of the divisional impacts within city utilities and to wrap up the presentation.
All right, thank you very much, Mike. So what I'm doing in this slide is just giving you some highlights of some of the initiatives and some of the impacts that have been felt by the division in the past and going forward. In particular for water, we've had a system category change, and this is a category that's mandated by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, and this is one of the key ministries that we work with daily and governs everything that we do. What this change had an impact on is our operator licenses and what skill level that our operators need to have in terms of those licenses. One thing that we've been working on in water is leak detection programs. We actually have a permanent network of monitors out in our system that was actually established a few years ago under council approval, and that actually provides a very good, let's say, eye in the sky to see if there's any impacts that are being seen in our piping network. But we've actually invested further money into some additional tools and processes to better find those leaks. And why the leaks are important is that we pay the region for every liter of water. So if anything leaks out after we've been metered by the region, it's coming out of our pocket. So that's really important to get a handle on the leak detection. And that's really a best management practice that the industry needs to be on top of. Likewise, work management processes. That's the initiative there is to use what the city has. There's many great tools within the city, so we're looking at maximizing the use of Maximo. That's actually maximizing Maximo. That's a great way to put it, and we want to increase efficiency by using those tools. So there's a couple other things that we're doing along those lines. For wastewater, we benefited from a grant for our SCADA system, and that's a mouthful. It's the Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition System. Now, what that really means is that it's how we remotely control and remotely monitor all of our pump stations, and those are really important because if a pump station is not operating properly, we could have sewage backing up into pipes in neighborhoods, and that could flood basements. So obviously, basement flooding, very serious. We also could have spills, and that could lead to issues with the MECP and other ministries. So it's a very significant tool in our use that we can make sure that we don't have any environmental issues or property damage. So those that system really important, and we've been able to leverage a grant to get some recommendations for that system and bringing it up to current standards. And also out of that, we'll be doing some upgrades. So there's some great work in that SCADA system. Also along those lines is best management practices for the wastewater collections and even pump station maintenance. The big impact for us was environmental compliance approvals download. This used to be run by the ministry, the MECP, and there's a program through the region which is essentially working with the ministry. That has now been downloaded to the municipalities. So we have an administrative requirement and also a technical requirement. So we have to review all of the alteration permits. So if a development wants to move forward, there's basically a permit application that goes in. We administratively examine that now, and we actually technically approve it. So that is a complete download from the province to municipalities, and that's being felt everywhere in Ontario. It's actually the same issue is being felt in stormwater because there's two separate ECAs, we call it, or consolidated it's called the Consolidated Linear Infrastructure ECA, and those are now being held by the city for both stormwater and wastewater systems. For stormwater, we had an investment that was made in 2021, which is a vacuum excavator truck. We never had a more of a construction style excavator truck, and that's been very well utilized in 2022. We've had it fully engaged for many excavation, or pretty much all the excavations across the city, and we've actually reduced a contract. We've eliminated a contract for catch basin cleaning by using that truck and internal resources. So there's a bit of a savings we've seen with that vacuum excavator truck. We also were benefiting from a grant, a larger grant for flood risk assessment. And it actually ties back to that SCADA system that I talked about for stormwater system monitoring. And the flood risk assessment is to basically look at the model that the city, or take a hydraulic model that is used to examine all the stormwater flows in the city, and look at flood risk through that model, and validate that with some actual readings that we get from the system. Again, it goes back to that climate change, resiliency, and also just understanding the impacts of climate change. So very important project for us. Again, similar to wastewater, best management practices, and we've been impacted by that ECA process. Now, we've heard a little bit about Bill 23, and I'm not going to repeat all the details here, but here, the impact to city utilities is the projects that are ongoing for infrastructure. Some of those are co-funded by DCs. So, there is a potential for reduced or delayed construction of needed growth infrastructure that is including all of our water infrastructure, so water, wastewater, and storm, and or transferring that financial burden onto general tax base, or back as well to the ratepayers. So that examination is taking place, and that'll be assessed all through this year once we have more information, and that'll be looked at, as Brad noted, in the 2024 to 2026 budget, and we'll have it in the city utilities rate report for next year, so 2024. And in summary, we do have a 2023 recommended rate strategy that aligns with the proposed 2023 budget, and we know that that's going to be examined in greater detail, as Mike mentioned. And it also aligns with that 2024 to 2032 capital forecast. The annual financial impact of these rates that we've presented today, they represent a 5.1% increase, which is about $59, just over $59 to the average household at that 17 cubic meters per month of usage. We do have rates that compare very, very favorably to all of our neighboring municipalities. So that's the two, Cambridge, Kitchener, and the 4 townships. Our reserves are at appropriate levels throughout that forecast period, as noted in Mike's slides. And we continue as a division to invest in programs, maintenance activities, and asset rehabilitation to continue to supply, obviously, safe drinking water, having effective wastewater collection so we don't have that any impacts from property damage, and source water protection through effective stormwater management. So, and the impacts that I noted in the 2 slides ago are really from some reclassification and that download of the environmental compliance approval process from the province. So that concludes our presentation, and we will open the floor to questions and comments.
Thank you very much. So now I'm turning to council for questions on this report. Mayor McCabe, do you have any questions?
Yeah, thanks very much to you both for the presentation. It was very thorough and much appreciated. So I didn't quite catch when you were talking about the consolidated linear, the download that the province said. When did that occur, and what was the impact in terms of like fees? Like, did they help cover the cost of that download, or if you could just explain that a little bit more detail, please.
Yes, certainly, Mayor McCabe. So the through you, Chair Freeman, to the mayor, we found out about this this change probably in late 2021, and it was communicated by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation Parks, so MECP. I'm just going to call it the MECP, just for it's a mouthful of a ministry. The ministry indicated that they were sending that down to the municipal level in late 2021, and that we would be required to submit. I think the notice came in August of 2021, and within a few months, we had a request to provide a very comprehensive overview of both our wastewater system and our storm system. So that's basically all of the infrastructure, pipes, and like for stormwater, it's the piping, the storm ponds, any other structures. For wastewater, similarly, pipes and pump stations. That was submitted to the ministry, and then the whole process started for that consolidated ECA. Now there is no money. I can definitely confirm, $0 for any of that work. Now we will be going forward charging fees, much like the ministry did. So we will be charging our own fees as a city to anybody who wants to make an alteration to the system. So that's developers for its recon. It's actually internal money as well. And so some of that funding will go to support some of the extra effort involved, but there will be extra effort because it's all of the administrative work to maintain that. There is annual reporting requirements. There's annual monitoring requirements. So, and again, there's no download of funding. So there's download of a lot of things to do, but no download of funding to support that. So that's borne by us as a municipality.
Well, I can't say that I'm surprised that there was no funding that accompanied that download, but thanks for that explanation, because that sounds like it was, I mean, the way you described it, it sounded like kind of a little thing, but I think it's actually, the way you've described it now, it sounds like it's actually not such a little thing, all the reporting and the administrative pieces that go along, and it sounds like they did that almost immediately, well, a few months after they downloaded this to you, so. Yeah, that's unfortunately seems to be a bit of a modus operandi of the provincial government, which is unfortunate. Just a follow-up question. Can you just briefly explain how the Bill 23, the legislative change, could impact our stormwater system and the fee structure that we have here?
Right. And as I understand it, and I think I might get Mike or Brad to say something further if I don't capture this correctly, but essentially under Bill 23, there's a reduction in the DCs that can be collected, and what that ultimately means is that if there is infrastructure planned that includes all of the different infrastructure classes, so water, wastewater, storm, roadways. There's different funding formulas for each of those, and some come from different reserves within the city, and some come from DCs. But it will be the dance that the city will have is to try to optimize the expenditure of all of the reserves, including the DCs, to get the most bang for the buck. That's very simply put to say, going forward, it's that it'll be trying to optimize that, and that may preclude different projects if they are of one class, let's say, or if they have less funding, if they have more DC funding, less reserve funding, it'll be harder to let those ones go through because we'll have to find more money to support those projects. So Mike, is that pretty close?
No, that's pretty good, Lee. I'll just add one thing. So through your chair, Freeman, Mayor McCabe. So there'll be a bit more detail in the report coming up. But in essence, there's been new exemptions and waivers of fees for development charges to the development industry. So in the past, when we may have collected $100, maybe now we only collect $90 or $95, depending on the exemption. So we still budget the $100 to be spent, but now that extra $5 or $10 would have to come from stormwater, other reserve, if we want the project to move forward, or it would have to be delayed until we get enough development charge collections. So that's kind of the essence of what Lee's reiterating, is that, you know, we have to make those tough decisions. Do we put the stormwater funding towards a growth project, or do we rehabilitate existing assets? And then you can't go forward with a growth project if it only has 80% or 90% of the funding, right? So again, there'll be further detail coming up, but I think that's the point that we're trying to make here, is how it could impact the utilities.
Right, so essentially, we have to either have a trade-off of investing in our stormwater system, or potentially okaying whether or not a housing development might go ahead, or whether that housing development needs to be delayed because we don't have enough funds to actually extend the stormwater or other infrastructure that's required to actually build homes.
Correct. We've always had to balance the growth versus infrastructure equation, and that's just going to be a little trickier now. And ultimately, we could raise rates to make up the difference, and then that solves the problem. But we're trying to be aware of all the different pressures. So,
right. I think tricky is a pretty judicious word.
yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Did you have any other questions on this?
No, I'll
report?
go if council has other
No, I'm
comments or
looking
questions.
to see. Did any other members of okay. So I need a motion to approve the recommendation in your packet as it relates to the city utilities. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Hanmer? Seconder? Councillor Roach, thank you. All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. I appreciate your work and the work of your team.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mayor and councillors.
Thank you. So we're moving on to item D, the Uptown Community Improvement Program update. And Joseph, do you have a presentation, or are you here to answer questions? Oh, I see there's a presentation.
Yeah,
Yep, great. Thank you. Please proceed.
Hello, Mayor and Council. My name is Joseph Segato, and I'm the Economic Development Coordinator for the City of Waterloo. A major part of my role at the city is to facilitate and oversee the city's community improvement plans. Community improvement plans are a tool used by municipalities to revitalize areas of the city or community through programs, grants, and incentives. I've come here today to ask for an extension of the Uptown Community Improvement Plan and provide a refresher to the Mayor and Council on the program's operations. So the Uptown CIP was implemented in 2015 to aid development and revitalization of businesses in the Uptown core, as well as support local employment, heritage conservation, and affordable housing. As shown on the slide, the project area extends along King Street north to Seagram, south to the municipal boundary, Avondale to the west along Herb, and more to the east along Bridgeport. So there's currently 3 active programs within the Uptown CIP. Those include the Facade Improvement Grant, the Major Activity Grant, and the Parking Exemption Program. The Facade Improvement Grant supports improvements to streetscape and exterior building facades through a matching 50-50 grant to a maximum of $15,000 and or an additional $5,000 if the property has a heritage designation. The Major Activity Grant promotes major redevelopment projects through a tax increment grant, or a TIG. And the Parking Exemption Program facilitates small expansions or changes in use where a developer is not able to provide the required on-site parking. So just a recap of a bit of the performance for the program since it's been initiated or implemented. There's been 115 total applications. 88 of those have been approved, and 90% of all those applications are for the Facade Improvement Grant, so it's widely our most popular program. Some key insights to take note of. As you may have read in the report, 2017 saw a large number of applications submitted. This is presumed to be from the LRT and Uptown streetscape construction. During this period, lots of businesses were left in disarray and foot traffic was at a low for most of these businesses. There was no better time to take on exterior renovations. Then we slipped into 2020 and had peak COVID, and we saw applications dramatically cool off. This was peak COVID, and general business operations were slowed or closed. It was unknown how the program would progress or fare as we move forward. But thankfully, a couple years later, we've had 2 consecutive years of growth since 2020 and a lot of accumulated interest. A possible contributing factor to that growth stems from our team reaching out to the heritage properties in the McGregor-Albert Heritage Conservation District to remind them of the program's existence, and in turn, we received a number of successful applications to the program. So now I just want to go through and show you a couple of visual transformations we've seen through this program. Again, these are all going to be through the facade improvement grant, but it's nice to have a visual representation of what we're seeing. So I'm going to start with 14 King Street South here. This is an application from 2017. As you can see, there's a lot changed here, but signage, lighting, the color change, and the window graphics are the most recognizable. It gives the business a modern and refreshed look after the transformation. This is another one from 2017. This is 10 King Street North. I chose this one because it's particularly interesting. You can see the applicant incorporating the use of the pre-existing architectural features in the pillars, if you can see in the left picture, and they've painted them and added signage and lighting to better represent their business portfolio. And moving on to 40 King Street South, this is a much more recent application. This one's from 2021. The most apparent feature on this transformation is the signage, and the new signage adds a more modern look to the exterior facade and also goes a long way to improve the nightlife vibrancy. This one as well from 2021, 80 King Street North. Lots of changes seen here, including the installation of new light fixtures, signage, window graphics, white exterior paint, and board and batten design elements for added texture. I chose this facade because it stands out from the other applicants and helps contribute to unique storefronts in a diverse uptown core. And lastly, as I mentioned, we do offer this program to heritage homeowners or property owners, and this property is located in the McGregor-Albert Heritage Conservation District. As you can see, with the help of the facade grant, the program transforms into a beautiful reenactment of its glory days. The finished product here allows the features of the home to shine, but also improve the build quality and overall integrity of the building itself. So that's the last one I'm going to show. Thanks for listening. That was just a quick refresher of the program. I'd be happy to answer any questions regarding the report or my presentation.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Council, any questions for our presenter? Councillor Hanmer.
Thank you, Councillor Freeman, through you. Joseph, thank you very much for the presentation and the report. The facades are great to see, and what a change they do make. I was just curious, in the recommendations, you're asking that we continue all 3 programs, but I didn't really see a lot on the parking exemption. And so can you just talk about that a little bit and why you want it continued?
Yeah, for sure. So the parking exemption and the major activity grant actually don't get a lot of uptake, but they're super important to us for one reason mainly, and that's because they're free. So it would make no reason to discontinue a program that we don't have to pay anything for. The parking exemption program specifically is free, but the major activity grant funds itself through the increased tax revenue that it generates. So it just made sense to keep them going as we have this facade program going as well.
Great, thank you, that helps.
Any other questions? Councillor Hanmer, would you like to move that?
I would be happy to second it and let the ward councillor move it.
Yes. Okay. Councillor Wright moves it, seconded by Councillor Hanmer. All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you very, very much. Okay, so we're moving on to an item that came onto our agenda as a revised agenda. It's the Bill 23 More Homes Built Faster Act. This is a very timely report and something that council asked staff to put together. So in addition to all of your work on the budget, I know that you also pulled this all together for us this evening. And I just want to let you know how much we appreciate that. And also, I think more broadly for those that are with us today, I'd like you to know that we've received a lot of emails as council to say thank you for putting this together. So it's not just council thanking you, it's also the broader citizenry. And I know that we have a delegation. I was thinking we would receive the report first and then hear from the delegation. Does that make sense, Clerk?
Yes, we have a presentation from staff first, and then the
Yeah.
delegation, and then consideration of the recommendation.
That's great. Thank you very much. Please proceed, Mr. Cotter.
Thank you, Chair Freeman, Mayor McCabe, members of council, and members of the public watching this evening or this afternoon. Here to provide a brief presentation. You've heard quite a bit this afternoon around Bill 23, and this is just a brief presentation and a staff report on the adaptation of the city's procedures and operations towards Bill 23. And I'm joined here by Philippa Reynolds. So for council's context, on October 25th, 2022, the Government of Ontario introduced Bill 23, the More Homes Built Faster Act, in response to Ontario's housing supply crisis and the province's ambitious goal of constructing 1.5 million new homes to be built within the next 10 years. The bill was posted to the registry, the Environmental Registry of Ontario, the ERO, on October 25th, with commenting opening for 45 days ending December 9th. It's a highly consequential component of piece of legislation with a lot of amendments to various pieces of legislation. And ultimately, as a result of that, Council of the day passed a motion on November 14th requesting the province of Ontario to defer the legislation until the new council could be provided an opportunity to review and comment on that legislation. And that motion is appended to staff's report in Appendix A. Recognizing again how highly consequential this legislation is, the administration did provide comments on Bill 23 on November 22nd, and those comments were appended to staff's report as Appendix B. Notwithstanding the commenting period still being opened, Bill 23 was passed by the legislature, and received royal assent on November 28th. So as I noted, it's highly consequential legislation. We're in a time of significant amendments to a wide number of legislative documents that are critical to the city's operations. Some of the more recent amendments are Bill 23, Bill 109 also received recent approval, and Bill 39, which is currently, I think, in second reading, which is in motion. And all of these are far-reaching pieces of legislation, and that will change generally how the city operates in terms of land use planning and its municipal financing, in particular in relation to development charges. The rapid introduction of this legislation does require a number of adaptations that staff and the corporation are going to need to make to several key divisions, in particular planning, finance, legal services, legislative services, engineering, and building standards. The legislation, as noted in the third bullet on the slide, is a departure from the widely accepted concept that growth pays for growth. And it has significant impacts in terms of diminishing how the city recovers costs, in particular, again, through development charges, but also in relation to community benefit charges and parkland. And while there are a number of good components to Bill 23 that are outlined in staff's comments that were appended to the staff report as Appendix B, there are a wide number of concerns that we ultimately have with respect to the legislation. And as a result of that, we did put those comments forward through our administrative letter signed by CAO Anderson. In terms of some of the key planning considerations, ultimately one of the key components of the bill is there will be a shift from regional planning to the city and other area municipalities. That'll have broad-reaching implications to how we do business, but also for some of the planning concepts that we abide by within this region to protect, our cultural heritage landscapes, our environmental areas, our countryside lines, The region has typically taken the front and center role on those planning elements, and ultimately that will be shifted to the lower tier municipalities. Combined with the other legislation, it will result in reduced public involvement in land use development applications. Will require faster approval of the applications that are before the city, so we will ultimately be charged with reviewing and bringing forward reports to council in a quicker time frame, ultimately with the legislation with lesser planning and development authorities granted to municipalities. There will be immediate staffing pressures and the need for additional professional services that will be required to respond to these legislative amendments. And further, there's concerns related to diminished role of the conservation authorities, who within this region we work very collaboratively and closely with the planners, the engineers, and the other experts at the Grand River Conservation Authority to review our policies and to advance a wide range of development applications. And ultimately, the GRCA's authority will be weakened with respect to natural hazard protections, wetlands, and ultimately water quality. In terms of key financial considerations, I can speak to it if you want. I'll speak to it, and then Philippa can fill in all the details should there be questions. But ultimately, there's a wide range of, again, financial implications that we talked about. It's going to impact development charges, community benefit charges, and parkland contributions. With respect to capital financial impacts, we're looking at 23 to 31 million dollars in potential lost revenue, or 27 to 36%, as a result of lower development charges being received. That is outside, or in addition to that, we'll see potential operating cost increases in the $2 to $3 million per year range being added to that. And overall, as you can see in the chart, the bottom two lines, that equates to a potential property tax impact of 7 to 10%. In terms of adapting to the legislation, we initially had some discussions around the implications of Bill 23, and we believed as senior staff that it would be beneficial to look at kind of 10 points as an initial starting point to see how this legislation, these likely are not the last or the only adaptation points that will come forward, but these are an initial effort to bring forward some core areas that council can review, provide direction to staff on that we can start working on immediately given the timing of this legislation, which is in effect. Certain parts of the legislation kick in January, and other legislation or other components of the legislation will take effect upon proclamation. Adapting to the new legislation, there will need to be a corporate effort, primarily led by planning and finance staff, to identify a number of the early measures that we need to adapt to these changes corporately. We're going to need to carefully look at and sustain the growth and development programs that we have, and how we ultimately advance and adapt our approaches to land use planning, municipal financing, heritage conservation, and local governance. So the staff report we've presented to council, which is IPPW 2022-063, presents 10 core areas to focus on for council as an initial step towards adapting to Bill 23. We know the legislation, despite the concerns that we've raised, is here. We're going to need to adapt to it. We're going to need to adapt to it fairly quickly, as well as the other legislative changes that are outlined in the staff report, including Bill 109 and the pending Bill 39. So the 10 points that we've identified before council, the first two relate to process. They're continuing to streamline our development approvals. And the second one is to revisit our approach or revise our approach to how we do planning application consultation, and we'll be bringing information on that forward to council in the new year. The third and fourth points relate to collaboration, and those are tied to joint initiatives with other local municipalities and continuing to collaborate with the development industry. Because no matter what we do in terms of the planning framework that we put together, we ultimately need the development industry to deliver the housing, including affordable housing and attainable housing, at the pace that's needed to respond to the need that's out there. The fifth and sixth points relate to finance. Those are primarily relating to adjusting staffing, creating an operating pressure, and as outlined in the staff report, anticipating somewhere between 5 and 8 additional full-time equivalent staffing individuals will be required to respond to the legislation and the amendments that are advanced. Number 6 is, again, to evaluate to evaluate options to mitigate the financial impacts. There's quite a lengthy section within the staff report that speaks to this matter. If council has questions, I'm sure Philippa can take the lead on responding to those particular options. Number 7 is engagement within engagement with respect to Bill 39. It's an opportunity for us to understand, again, some of the ways in which the province intends to implement Bill 23. The intention is to bring on a provincial facilitator and look at the best mix of responsibilities between the upper tier and the lower tier municipalities. So it's an opportunity, again, for us to work with the province to try and understand what that best mix looks like and ensure that all stakeholders are engaged and given an opportunity to comment on Bill 39. The next 2 numbers, 8 and 9, are key project related items. Those are stationary zoning and affordable housing strategy. The stationary zoning is something that we're looking forward to bringing to council as soon as we receive the adoption of ROP Amendment 6, which was posted to the Environmental Registry of Ontario on December 5th. And once that clears ultimate regional or provincial approval and becomes in effect, then that will clear the way for us to start implementing stationary planning, which the city ultimately approved in 2017, but has been held back because of legislative constraints for moving our major transit stationary zoning forward. The affordable housing strategy will be brought forward. The target is February of 2023 for council's consideration, but based on the legislative changes, in particular the incentive approach that the province has taken with respect to affordable housing around waiving development charges and parkland and other fees, it will require staff to rethink the initial incentive approach that we originally had proposed to council, which was an affordable housing grant program. And the final point is around public communication. We've heard a lot of concerns from the community, from interest groups with respect to the implications of Bill 23. And again, I think there will be a need to continue to reassure the public that the planning principles that the city holds dear, the financial standards that we have, and our strategic objectives as a municipality will remain intact regardless of Bill 23. So the report is fairly detailed. It outlines each of those 10 points in much more detail. So I will move to thank you for listening to the brief presentation. And if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer the planning, and Philippa can assist council with responding to any of the financial questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cutter. I actually like the new word that you created where we combine strategy with tragedy.
Yeah.
So that's exactly how Bill 23 feels right now. Someone's strategy is everyone else's tragedy. I appreciate your presentation. I'm just going to ask if there's any questions on the presentation or if you'd rather hear from the delegation first. I think it'd be nice to hear from the delegation, if that's okay, and then we'll ask questions after that. Yeah. So welcome, Kay. It's always good to see you. And please, you have 5 minutes.
Right. Yeah. So a number of you know me from before, but for new councillors, I'm a resident of the McGregor neighborhood. And as you'll see, I'm fairly engaged with this whole process. So to move it forward, do I just hit? How do I do?
You can hit the down button on the keyboard too.
Oh, on the keyboard. Okay. I haven't been here for a couple of years. It's really nice to be back. Okay, move me down. Okay.
Easiest thing is just page down.
Okay, all right, okay. So as I was happy to hear there've been other emails, other people saying this, because I know within the broad coalition of people who've been trying to work on this bill, we were all really excited to see both the resolution from the outgoing Waterloo Council asking for the bill to be delayed, and also to see this report today. And just so thank you very much for your quick response and the careful analysis that you've done, formulation of the 10-point plan. And I guess I really have to thank you for the problem-solving approach, because I know really we just feel like screaming most of the time, but in the end we do have to live with this. So it's good to be reminded of that and to try and figure out strategies that maybe we can mitigate some of this stuff. Because the concern is really widespread. Now, a lot of these demonstrations have focused on the Greenbelt, but you know, there's lots of things there. That list, I think there's been about 100 of them around the province, particularly targeting the Greenbelt areas. But locally, we had a petition signing during the Elmira Santa Claus Parade because people did not want to detract from the Santa Claus Parade. That was a given. So instead, they just set up a little booth in front of MPP Mike Harris Jr.'s office and got people to sign petitions, which Catherine Fife then took to Queen's Park and presented. And we had a rally down in Cambridge where, as you can see, there are a number of issues there that we mentioned, heritage, the conservation area, and so on. And the next day we had an even bigger rally in Kitchener. We had, I think, 143 people came out to that. And the response there was amazing. Like the cars just did not stop honking. It was really, really encouraging to see that. And I don't know how I'm going to do that, but I'd love to hit that little sound button on the thing, because there's a really great Greenbelt song. If you can do that for me. There's a Greenbelt protest song that Guelph rapper Noah 23 did that played throughout it, and it's kind of fun to hear, but I don't know if I can do that. Yeah. It may not work. Oh well. Trust me, it's fun. Okay, so the other thing we're continuing to do is we are targeting the Conservative MPP ridings locally and just trying to raise public awareness. These were some handbills we handed out to people, encouraging them to phone their MPP. Because we still think, and we know that there are concerns from people in the government about this, and so we're hoping to encourage them to send that message up the way. And on another note, as many of you know, I do have a background in heritage conservation, and almost on a whim, we posted this little petition to change.org about a week before the bill was to be voted. And yesterday we had 5,889 people signed it. And it's amazing to see the interest in that. You know, I'm really shocked about it. But it just shows you how many people, and most of those were Ontario, but it's other provinces too. It's really sending shockwaves throughout the heritage movement in Canada, this bill. And the other thing we've been working on a lot, and this is something I still have a little bit of hope in, we've really encouraged people to post to the Environmental Registry. Because again, a heritage example, with Bill 109, there were proposals changed to that, and they happened to come out at the time of the Ontario Heritage Conference, and we got all the delegates there to make posts and also to do that when they came home. And some of those changes never got implemented. And so there are still, most of those postings closed on December the 9th. But there's still some that where staff comments are being submitted. So this morning I was working on things about affordable housing, municipal replacement bylaws and so on. And certainly for Bill 39, I think that's something that's going to be very, very important for us all to register our feelings about that and to get our friends and neighbors and everyone else to do that. Because it is one avenue open to us. And as we've seen from staff here, staff care about their jobs and care, have some integrity. So it's worth it, I think. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Kay. The buzzer was not me, so I wasn't trying to cut you off. You had 8 seconds left. But thank you very much. Council, any questions for Kay? Councillor Bodley.
Thank you. I've just a comment, Kay. I just wanted to thank you for coming out, and I know you're not here representing SAC specifically, but just wanted to share that I really appreciated all of the expert advice and really thoughtful conversations that we've had at SAC around this as well too. It's been a really big motivator for me here on council. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay. Can I just ask you a quick question?
Sure.
I was just wondering how people find out about the work that you're doing as an individual citizen, and how you're sharing that, or how people could find out about if they wanted to help or ask you questions directly.
These are good questions, and I was asked that at the rallies, like who's organizing this, and it is really such a broad group. But locally, 50 by 30 WR is a good group for sending out notices of things going. And greenbeltpromise.ca is a good website for seeing the rallies. Again, the name suggests it's people worried about the Greenbelt stuff, but it is so much broader than that. So that website, greenbeltpromise.ca, is good for finding out kind of other actions on that. And locally, I would say get in touch with 50 by 30 WR, or also the Kitchener chapter of Council of Canadians. Those are both good organizations for keeping people informed.
Thanks very much, and I echo Councillor Bodley's comments about we appreciate the input that you've given on a number of committees and over the years. Thank you.
Thank you. So now I'm going to turn back to questions to staff on the staff report that we have. So questions for staff? Councillor Wright.
Thank you, through you, Chairwoman. I just want to touch on the timelines that we have. So we've got a couple of uncertainties with Bill 39. We have the region's official plan, and we have the implementation aspect of Bill 23. How are these things going to line up, and how will you approach that from a staff perspective?
Through you, Chair, to the councillor. It's a good question. It seems like a little bit of shifting sands every day, to be honest, in terms of all the amendments and adjustments that are happening. But ultimately, we're looking forward to see the regional official plan come into effect. It's posted to the Environmental Registry as of December 5th. So it's open for comments. How long the province takes after the comments are submitted to then formally approve the plan is an unknown. They're moving relatively quickly on most of the plans. So we're hopeful that we will see the Regional Official Plan Amendment 6 come into effect early in the new year. But we're also anticipating that the Bill 39 review will commence likely in the February timeframe and work its way through into the summer. So there's a lot of moving parts to a lot of these pieces. Ultimately, what staff are intending to do is to return to council in January to speak to some of those process pieces around updating our planning permissions, looking at some additional delegated authority for technical related matters or minor related matters that can speed up the development approvals process, and ultimately speak to council on matters such as public consultation. This council is always, the city's always held a firm belief that we want open, transparent, and engaged community consultation and planning applications and all types of applications. And this approach is really about moving faster and less about consultation. So to meet these new legislative timeframes, unfortunately, the city's going to have to adapt our current process. And again, we'll be returning to council in the early 2023 to speak to council about amendments to our official plan, which sets out how we notify the public in terms of, in particular, planning applications and undertake engagement. So a lot of moving parts. Can't specifically state how it'll all fit together. It's literally day by day.
Thank you, Mayor McCabe. Sorry, Councillor Wright, did you have any other questions? Okay, thanks, Mayor McCabe.
Just on that point about the development applications, when the city was, or when the province provided some funding for us to, or you, I should say, to review the planning processes and like the approvals processes, that was January or February this year. Could you just, like, what were some of the changes that you were able to achieve with that funding, and what are some things that you're still looking at doing? I'm just asking because my understanding from looking at Bill 23, or the part of the government's reason for doing this is they're trying to speed up application, the whole process. But I'm wondering what we've already done before the province provided this funding for streamlining the processes, and what you've done and what you're already anticipating doing.
Through you, Chair, to the Mayor. Excellent question. I think the city has always strived to look for efficiencies in every day-to-day activity and continuous improvements. So we're constantly looking at ways to streamline. The challenge really for us is we have a limited amount of staff and we're incredibly fast growing municipality, right? So we have a lot of development applications that are coming before us. So we've got to balance that against our ability to modify processes. But in terms of the streamlining development fund money that's come forward, we've used that money to retain some staff to deal with some additional backlogs. We've used it to support communications in working on enhancements to the webpage and Engage Waterloo, which again, all of this is still in motion. We expect that a number of these initiatives will be brought to council in late January or February. The time frame for completing the fund is the end of February, so we're still working on a number of these initiatives, but just for council's awareness that we will be bringing forward a number of these components to council for information and potentially direction to staff. We're also using some of the additional money to undertake a number of studies. We're looking at where in the city we could potentially grow higher than our current planning framework, which is 25 stories. So where in the city might it be appropriate to go higher than the 25 stories, again, to ensure that we're efficiently using the land that we have and growing inward and upward and trying to limit the impacts of sprawl. We're re-examining our parking rates, which was a commitment we made when we updated our in 2018, the zoning bylaw review that was undertaken by council. We committed to coming back in a number of years to reevaluate parking. The challenge with the new zoning bylaw was we were enacting it just before ION was in effect. So we want to understand the potential implications of ION and try and again further refine parking so we're not over parking sites, but we're still meeting the needs of developments. We're looking at what's called a community planning permit system, which is another component of the Planning Act. It mixes zoning with site planning into a more streamlined approval process. So we're looking at where in the city might we be able to implement such a community planning permit system, and that work is ongoing. We're working on looking at what the requirements are for complete applications in terms of references. And we're out engaging consultants right now on completing those terms of reference requirements, which is a joint initiative. We are working in concert with our counterparts in all the area municipalities and with the region to share that information with the goal that once we have a template of what is required to, let's say, undertake a transportation impact study, that all the area municipalities are very much aligned in what that requirement is. And we can get proper and better studies up front, which will then hopefully allow us to make decisions on applications in a more streamlined manner. So there's wide number of initiatives that we have underway. Again, all of them, I think all of them are still in motion. And we've also supported legal services in trying to assist with a legal clerk to, again, deal with backlog. So all of that's in motion, and we hope to report back to council likely in early, maybe mid-February.
Thanks very much for that thorough answer. It just strikes me that the province it has given you the opportunity to do a lot of this work through the funding that they provided, and you're trying to do that work and catch up. And we're a growing city, so you're trying to catch up on all the applications that we have. But then they're throwing in new legislation and new, as you said, things are shifting every day. So it's sort of a very curious approach. If they're trying to actually build housing more quickly, that there feels like they're kind of bogging you down in the process. So that's just a comment. You don't have to respond to that. But I do have other questions. But if other people wanted to, I'm willing to take my turn. Thank you.
I know that Councillor Vasek has questions, but does it make sense just to let the mayor finish? Just finish your questions, please, and then I'll move around the council chambers. You might have questions that others have, and they'll get answered.
Sure. Okay. I was also wondering, because there's reference, the province earlier this year struck the Affordable Housing Task Force that had provided a report, and then and had set an implementation table or task force. My understanding is that they haven't moved forward with that. Like, they haven't called that task force together. It was supposed to be chaired by Mayor Drew Dilkins in Windsor. I was just wondering if you have any update on what's happening with that, or maybe I'm just curious about why they would have established that sort of task force with this urgency and then never convened it.
Through you, Chair, to the Mayor. I don't have an update. I know the province is slowly integrating some of their original task force recommendations into all these pieces of legislation that are coming forward. So there's components of it within Bill 109. There's components of that action plan within Bill 23. Not all of it is there. So there seems to be a bit of a strategic approach on how this is being implemented. And certainly the Minister of Municipal Affairs has indicated that additional amendments will be coming in the future, right? Again, as the province works towards that ambitious goal of 1.5 million homes over 10 years. So I don't expect Bill 23 or Bill 39 to be the last amendments that we see. And certainly each of those components, I think, of the Housing Task Force are being evaluated. The challenge is municipalities aren't all the same, right? We have a very different context than even some of the other local municipalities compared to Kitchener and Cambridge. We're going in and we're going up in terms of how we're managing our growth. And for us to process a planning application in 90 days when it's for 10 towers on a 10-acre site or something of that nature, those are big, complicated development applications, and 90 days is going to be extremely challenging for the city. So again, we're looking to adapt to this new system. We're committed to streamlining our approvals and working towards the goal of building more homes faster, but likely not at the expense of how we do business here at the city in terms of good planning is the ultimate outcome that we're looking for. In my discussions with the development industry, it's the same philosophy. They're looking for good developments. That's their intention in most regards, right, is to bring forward developments that contribute positively towards the community, and that's our goal as well in the planning division.
Right. Certainly, I think there's a number of developers I've spoken to who very much share, like they want to build a community that's vibrant and is connected to the street, and certainly I think it sounds like this is going to make it challenging for them as well. I'm just also curious about the report indicated that we have about 22,000 housing units somewhere in the approvals pipeline. So there are some development applications that are fully approved. I'm just wondering if you could comment on why, or maybe it's a speculation, but if you know in some cases why developers have not moved ahead to build some of the housing units, and approximately how many housing units we have that are fully approved that could have gone ahead, yesterday.
Yeah, through you, Chair, to the Mayor. Excellent question, complicated answer. The reason housing doesn't move forward, notwithstanding it's approved, can be because of a wide range of factors. But ultimately, the industry is looking for assurances on trying to move a particular project. They're often trying to put a particular housing concept, for example, on a irregular shaped parcel of land, and they require some relief, and they work their way through the process. But then what's not necessarily discussed around the city, but does make note in the staff report, is there's a wide range of factors that municipalities in the province don't control. Supply chains, disruptions, developer disputes, but just even general financing, right? To move a project forward, often a developer, if it's a condo type building, will need to do a certain amount of pre-sales to get bank loans. So until they reach that pre-sale threshold, they're not moving forward. Depending on the nature of their development, if the units are reasonably priced, project moves faster. If they're building, a higher end product, maybe the sales are slower and it takes longer for them to build. But we have significant amounts of land in the city's nodes and corridors, and even within some of our greenfield lands that are able to be built upon, subject to securing, in some cases, site planning or building permits. But often there's a desire by the industry to also tailor their particular project to a site, which requires some approvals of the council, and that can add some additional time. But there's lots of land within the city that can be built relatively quickly if they comply with the zoning that's in effect. And again, we just did and updated the city zoning bylaw in 2018 to try and keep it relatively current.
Thank you. Should I keep asking my questions, or I feel like I should pass the microphone on?
I would just finish asking your questions.
Okay. Thank you for your indulgence, Council. Just curious I don't know if you can answer this. Do you think the province's definition of affordable housing is the same as our definition here of affordable housing?
Through you, Chair, to the Mayor. It's close. I believe it's close. Our definition, I think, relied on CMHC, and they're referencing a different metric in terms of what they're relying on as affordable, but I believe the intent is roughly the same, being 80% of the value of the market rate.
Okay. And with you in your report, you noted that you would recommend that in the inclusionary zoning area that housing in that area would remain affordable for a longer period of time. How long do you think that it should remain affordable?
In my opinion, I'd like to see it in perpetuity. Would be the ideal. A number of the projects that you'll see that will come across from affordable housing will be a mix of market rate and affordable units. Usually the percentage is 70-30, so 70 market rate, 30 affordable. In some cases, the region is trying to shift that to 60-40, so 60 market rate, 40% affordable units. In the span of development, 25 years is a relatively short period of time. And the concern is that if there's a number of these projects that move forward at a similar point in time, then once the 25 years is reached, then you're going to hit another critical point. And the timing for development, it does take a while to work its way through the system, and in planning and development is not a quick response in terms of some of the market shifts and some of the market demands. There's usually at least a 2 to 3 year lag sometimes. Once there's a need that's identified, there's 2 to 3 years sometimes for the industry to respond and product to be built. So ultimately, the longer the duration, I think, is the better answer for the community. And one of the pieces you'll see in the staff report that we submitted administratively to the province was their approach is very rigid, and we had asked for some flexibility. They had said 5% for 25 years, and we were saying, well, what if we did 3% for 50 years? Maybe that's better for a developer, better for the community in terms of the outcome. We asked for some flexibility, but the legislation didn't bend on that particular point. So we'll continue to look for strategies. As I said, our goal is to bring forward an affordable housing strategy to council in February, but the legislation is requiring us to rethink some of those components.
Thank you. I just also wondered if you could explain a little bit more about the discounts for rental housing. Is that to incentivize development? Because currently there's a real lack of like 2 or 3 bedroom rental houses. Is there something in this legislation that would incentivize developers to actually build that kind of housing? I mean, it's clearly a need in our community and likely others.
Through your chair to the mayor, nothing that I'm aware of in the legislation that would incentivize or direct or obligate a developer to provide that type of housing. It speaks to the provision of affordable housing, and subject to the provision of one affordable housing unit, they will receive reductions in parkland contributions. So we'll see how the industry responds to it. I think the province is going to continue to try and push their agenda forward, which is more houses, but also more affordable and attainable houses. So hopefully the industry rises to the challenge, and we do see a good uptake of more houses being brought to market from a supply perspective, but also more affordable and attainable housing brought to market. But there's not a lot of tools within our toolkit to require that to happen.
Right. I mean, it seems to me that in the transition of housing, like that, starting often with a rental housing unit and maybe having 2 or 3 bedrooms where people could start a family. I mean, that's a step in a person's journey sometimes to attainable housing, is it not? I mean, it feels like that's a real, certainly a lack in our community, but a gap in the provincial. I don't know, what was the word? How did you say strategy and tragedy?
Yes, a combination of strategy and tragedy.
It just feels like a real gap there, because that is certainly, I've heard from lots of people that there's a real need for that, in addition to, all kinds of housing in our community.
Yeah, for certain that there's a need for all types of housing. The 2 and 3 bedroom family oriented housing is really important, and you'll see a lot of push towards missing middle housing, mid-rise stick frame construction that's likely more cost effective to providing some of these affordable housing units. And also the ability to add second units, which again, if you can add a 2 bedroom or even a 3 bedroom second unit to an existing property, that's maybe where we'll see more uptake in providing some of those types of housing. The challenge is in terms of high rise, the cost to build 3 bedroom units in high rise development is extremely expensive and usually pushes the price of those 3 bedroom units to the realm of actually buying, say, a townhouse. So if a consumer is faced with the choice of this amount of money for a high rise 3 bedroom unit or a townhouse, right now the market is shifting those buyers mostly towards townhomes.
And what exists in our planning bylaws right now that would allow some more flexibility around housing units? Like you were talking about, secondary suites. Do we have some of those bylaws already in place and zoning in place that people could make some of or apply to make some of those changes?
Through your chair to the mayor, we do. We have currently permissions in our bylaw that allow second units to be constructed, coach houses on laneways, and when the province originally introduced the second unit option, which Bill 23 moves to 3 units, there were a number of questions and implementation related challenges that we wanted to work our way through. But ultimately, we've permitted them. There's been a pretty decent uptake on second units. There's a lot of interest. When the province introduced Bill 23, we've received a number of inquiries in planning with respect to doing the 3 unit permissions. We ultimately updated the city's official plan in June of this year to enable our zoning bylaw to allow for the 3rd unit. So again, when we're bringing forward amendments to our documents to update them in response to the legislation, we're going to be moving towards making 3 bedrooms effective with respect to the zoning. In the interim, we'll find solutions to try and help enable that housing to move forward either through committee of adjustment or staff interpretations with the assistance of legal services on how we can implement our bylaw to accommodate some of these housing forms.
Okay, that's great to hear. Thank you very much. And I think my last green development standards, maybe not my last, maybe nearly my last. Green development standards are, if nothing changes in Bill 23, are we still going to be able to, or can we implement some green development or set green development standards for developers? I know we don't have that in bylaw yet, but if we wanted, if council wanted to do that, is there still the possibility? I mean, as you said, building, you know, when a building's built, I mean, it lasts for, you know, many years, right? And it strikes me that, I mean, we're in a climate crisis and we need to reduce the carbon emitted, and certainly buildings are our first or second source of carbon emissions. So is there the opportunity to set green development standards even with Bill 23?
Through you, Chair, to the Mayor. Certainly we're working on green development standards, and we're also working on an update to our urban design manual. So both of those projects are underway, and we intend to continue to pursue them. Ultimately, we do have to play within the legislative tools that, or the legislation that we're given and the tools that we're given by that legislation. Ultimately, we have to comply with the building code, which does regulate how buildings, the standard and manner of construction. So the building code is kind of the primacy document, but certainly to move some of the other objectives, we're working on green development standards and looking at the tools that we have available to us, whether it's the Planning Act or the Municipal Act, to try and implement those green development standards, and you know, again, also obtain buy-in from the development industry. And we're working with groups like the Community Energy Investment Strategy that was originally created, community based collaboration with the local municipalities and the utilities to try and advance some of these initiatives. And it's through that group that region-wide green development standards are being worked on.
Okay, great. And those building codes are minimum standards, right?
I'm sure. Yeah, I got a nod from our CBO. Yes, they are. They're minimum standards.
Okay. And just my last question, I don't know if you can speculate on this, but just the track record with Durham Region and Hamilton, and I think Halton maybe too, Halton Region, with their regional official plans, I believe they were all not approved as submitted. What do you think our chances are in Waterloo Region that, if you're a betting person?
Through you, Chair, to the Mayor, I'm not much of a betting person, to be honest, so I'll likely decline to answer that question. The province, I think, will move forward their agenda in terms of what they believe is appropriate for the regional official plan, and then it will come down to the area municipalities in the region to work on implementing that plan. So again, I think the key here in this region is our joint collaborative approaches that we've taken. We do a number of joint initiatives. We work together. We talk to each other. You know, as a result of this recent round of legislation, I can't remember a time before this where, you know, as a result of Bill 109, Bill 23, there's a lot more dialogue, a lot more collaboration, a lot more sharing of information and working together as area municipalities to try and, you know, take good ideas and make them better, and strive for efficiencies and learn from each other. So there's a highly collaborative mode. We're going to take, I think, that approach and continue it forward. We'll see what the province comes out with the ROP, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, and thank you again to all the staff, finance planning, who pulled this report together for us in such a short period of time. We know you have a lot of other priorities, including building more homes that you're trying to get to.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Vasek.
Thanks, through you, Chair Freeman. I think, it's just so hard to trust this government, and I'm trying so hard to see if maybe they're doing something right to address the things that seem to be so wrong. So one of the things that was surprising / not surprising in the report is that the legislation doesn't actually, or the bill doesn't actually put anything into legislation that would require the building of any affordable or attainable homes. So, I mean, like, it's kind of how they're selling it, right? Like, it's so gross. So, what kind of requirements would you have expected to see in a bill like this for affordable and attainable homes? What would they have listed? And then I might have follow-up questions.
Through you, Chair, to the councillor. Good question, difficult question. Ultimately, I think, what would have been ideal is more accountability in terms of if financial incentives are being applied, for example, a DC waiver or a parkland waiver to a developer as a result of the provision of affordable housing, that there would have been greater assurances around the duration, how that affordable housing is secured. There's very little information on how all of this is going to be implemented. In some cases, what the implications are if someone builds an attainable house, gets a credit from the municipality, then sells that house, and then the next person sells that house. There's nothing in the legislation that protects that unit from necessarily being retained as either affordable or attainable. So there's a lot of questions that still are being discussed in terms of how all of this will be implemented. I think the core driver is the more supply that's provided in the province's mind, then that will continue to provide some relief to housing. But it would have been nice to see the legislation respond more in a concrete way as to how these affordable, attainable, and other legislated requirements that are being imposed as a result of some of the financial discounts that are being offered to developers, how those would result in concrete long-term housing. But it's not there from what I can see.
So is there anything that we can do tracking-wise at our municipality to better understand what that looks like? If anyone does build affordable or attainable, so it wouldn't be provincial accountability, but could we somehow track that to understand it over time?
Through you, Chair, to the councillor. Again, very good question. This is where our partnerships with the region, who is the local housing provider, service provider in the area, does typically track the data and monitor these types of units. So again, working with the region collectively with all the area municipalities, hopefully there's, again, a partnership there that can be struck to monitor affordable housing and attainable housing in the community in a better way and maybe a deeper way than is currently going on right now. We don't have the staff resources, and I think those are some of the financial pressures that we've identified to council, that to implement this legislation as it's been drafted, it does make certain assumptions that we will, deal with downloaded responsibilities, that we will implement staffing resources to monitor and track affordable housing, which those are services we currently, or staff we currently don't have available to us at this point.
Do you think there are any developers locally who would be interested in advocating for understanding how best to monitor that or provide accountability? I don't know the right question here. I'm just wondering, like, who's not involved that ought to be involved in saying, actually, province, this is your responsibility. Like, I really appreciate what you said, Kay, about, now we just have to scramble and problem solve. It's so hopeful. I'm just personally not feeling hopeful in any way about this right now. So just curious who's not on board, who might be able to come on board.
Through you, Chair, to the councillor. One of the points that we identified was that continued collaboration and discussions with the home building industry. So I think that is where some good conversations need to be had around how we're collectively going to work towards implementing this objective or ideal that the province has. The home building has to be at the table with us to move these items forward if we're going to see any type of positive outcome. So dealing with the Waterloo Region Home Builders Association certainly will be a key dialogue point. But I have had a number of conversations with developers who, look at this problem and try and solve this problem. If affordable housing was easy to solve, it would be solved. It's a complicated challenge, but there are some good developers. And again, the hope is that when we can see some of these developers pull off projects that do successfully integrate affordable housing into their things, we can use that as, see, it can be done. They've done it. Let's leverage that opportunity and see if you can beat them, right? Add 2 more units than they did and see where we can get to. So that's the goal. Maybe I'm a little too optimistic, but that's what we strive for in planning, right? We continue to try and push and work the relationships that we have with the industry to try and get them to come to the table and provide, a wide range of, types of housing, types of units, and some affordable housing units. But it's a complex market and there's a lot of factors involved.
Thanks for pointing me back to the report and the partnerships there, the hoped for. But just to flag a commercial on the radio that I believe is sponsored by the Waterloo Home Builders Association as well as the Ontario Home Builders Association. It is strongly in support of Bill 23 to build more homes. So I think we have more of an uphill battle. I mean, I think we know we have an uphill battle, but I think it's even more. It's just insidious. It's pretty gross.
Councillor Wright?
Thank you, Chair Freeman. Just one question about the role that the federal government has to play here as well. We've had a lot of conversation about the province, but the federal government also has goals in regards to affordable housing and to introducing net zero standards within the National Building Code. So are there conversations ongoing right now with federal partners in this regard in terms of understanding what funding might be coming through for cities?
Through you, Chair, to the councillor. Certainly, we have dialogue with the federal government as well, in particular CMHC, trying to monitor trends. Again, the core relationship there is really between the federal government and the region, to be honest, in terms of some of the bigger plays that are going on within the community. But often the city can act as a starting point to kind of spark, if you will, some of these projects to move forward, even though we may be a smaller contributor or smaller player in some of these projects. Once they know that there's municipal support behind it at the local level, it opens sometimes opportunities for the federal funding to kick in. So we've certainly supported recently, like Parkwood Mennonite Homes, the senior home that's coming forward, tried to support them in their funding applications to the province and to the federal government, and other initiatives like that within the community. So we are looking out for those opportunities. We have some dialogue with CMHC, which is the core group that we deal with respect to affordable housing. And from a grant perspective, it's not been my experience to see the city apply for grants. Again, it's what's our role within the affordable housing mix. It's more to support the region, who then tries to leverage those federal monies to implement region-wide.
Any other questions? Councillor Rowe?
Through you, Chair. I'm really happy to hear that there is a lot of collaboration and discussion between the municipalities. I'm wondering, just from your perspective, if the downloading of responsibilities to the municipalities is going to have a broader impact on the shared vision of the region as a whole.
Through you, Chair, to the councillor, big question. Ultimately, I think from my discussions with the local planning heads, there's a pretty clear vision for each of the communities on how we want to grow, and it really centers around good community building. So municipality-wise, I don't think the visions of each of the municipalities will really change drastically as a result of this legislation. The challenge, to be honest, is the long-term implications with respect to the decision to remove the planning authorities from the upper tier, from the region. So the region has really been the group that's been responsible for leading some of the big planning decisions around countryside lines, protections of agricultural lands, land budgets, some of the big servicing and transportation planning decisions. So really, if the province continues to remove all planning authorities from the upper tier, and we'll have to see what that looks like through Bill 39, because again, they're still talking about what's the right mix of upper tier to lower tier. So there's an opportunity for us to try and make our case to the province that this region works well. There's select functions that the region can serve in terms of planning that really support a collective regional vision in terms of countryside line, environmental protection, sustainability, cultural heritage landscapes, all of those elements. The region plays a critical role. If we're unsuccessful from a legislation perspective, I think it just means that, again, we're going to have to work collectively on reaching consensus as area municipalities on what we want to see and how we're going to be good neighbors to each other, really, at the end of the day. So I know our lines of communication are open from a planning perspective with the planning heads. I can say that's equivalent from every other director I speak to across the organization. They're all regularly discussing, CBOs to CBOs, CAOs to CAOs. Everybody's talking to each other, again, to share good ideas, steal good ideas, keep each other informed, and try and, again, move forward with a collective vision, because our interest really is to build a great community and build a great region at the end of the day.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Oh. Go ahead. He was gonna move the motion.
Oh,
with a
okay. I
comment.
just wondered if either of you could comment on if you could identify some of the capital projects. Like, we talk about infrastructure that won't go ahead, but like, can you identify some of the projects or the infrastructure, I guess, that may not be able to go ahead if we face, as you said, a $23 to $31 million gap, big hole in our budget over the next 5 years?
Through you, Chair Freeman, to Mayor McCabe. As we indicated a little earlier in one of the presentations, we've talked about Bill 23 multiple times, haven't we, today? We do plan to go away and have a look at our capital DC program to come back to Council on February the 6th with some potential recommendations at that time. So that's something that we're in the midst of doing. So I won't be able to share the thoughts about those programs or those projects right now, but we're on top of that and we are looking into it. I will also indicate that for 2023, and there's certainly some projects that could very much be deferred right away from 2023 for good reason that we would like to bring forward to council. But as we indicated, some of the impacts of Bill 23 for us will be deferred a little bit, not all of them. And so there is some hope that a few of the projects in our program for 2023 can still move forward, but we do need to think a little more long-term than that with regard to the reserve balances and what the priorities are. So great question, and we will be back to answer that in a few weeks' time.
Thank you. And I just think it's, and I look forward to that report. I just think people who aren't in the room here, but others who may be listening at some point, that like we're not talking in the abstract. Like, we're talking recreation centers, trails, parks, pumping stations or improvements to pumping stations, sewer lines, water lines. Like, this isn't an abstract concept. This is like real hard services that people use every day. These are the type of things that we're looking at and the decisions that we're going to have to make as a result of this bill.
Absolutely. And if I could just add too that there could be projects that, if deferred, could actually have the reverse effect of building homes faster, because it really is a chicken and egg type of situation, and servicing needs to happen and all sorts of things in order to allow development to occur. And yet, if you don't have the ability to collect the funds in order to do those things, it could certainly have an effect that is completely contrary to what the provincial government would like to accomplish. And so we have to weigh all of those different priorities and see what makes the most sense for the city of Waterloo and its constituents and residents.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's definitely challenging, 100%. So thank you for allowing me to ask so many questions and your thorough answers. Thank you, staff.
Thank you. All right, Councillor Bodley, you wanted to move the motion with a comment?
Yes, I would
I'm
if I
going
could.
to see if I can get a seconder first, and then seconded by Councillor Hanmer, and then please proceed.
Thank you, through you, Chair Freeman. So as part of the justification for this bill, Minister Clark has come out and stated that all councillors across the province ran on a platform of increasing affordable housing. And while that may be true, or mostly true, I really want to take a second to highlight from the staff report, and I quote, "It is unclear how the legislation will increase supply or how it will lead to an increase in affordable housing." And with respect to the minister, I'd also like to state that I imagine that there were very few councillors across the province who ran on a platform of solving the affordable housing crisis by gutting environmental protections and by building multi-million-dollar homes on greenbelt or environmentally sensitive lands. And so I just want to signal to community members, in spite of some of the challenges that we're dealing with, how important climate action still is to the city of Waterloo, and that's highlighted in our report, and how much more important climate adaptation may well be in light of the passage of this bill. And I hope that community members will hold our feet to the fire as part of our forthcoming strat plan to ensure that those things are captured in that planning. And lastly, I just want to applaud and thank staff again for putting this together. It is crucial that we prepare to adapt to this bill, and that was very well highlighted by staff in there. But that said, I want the many community members who are out there still fighting for the repeal of this bill to see as well that council and staff are also making our voices heard on the very damaging effects of this bill. So thank you again, and happy to move the recommendation as printed here.
Thank you. Any other comments? I just wanted to make one, and it's with regard to finances. If we think we have a pressure on affordable housing now, if we're forced to increase taxes by CPIX and another 8% to make up what the province is not going to cover, and we're expected to do that on a property tax base, which is a wholly regressive tax, we will only make the affordable housing problem much, much worse. We are literally going to be turning people out of their homes. And it's a crime, honestly. And it makes me very, very sad. All in favor? That's carried unanimously. I think staff wanted to raise their hands too, honestly. So as we move on, we are on to the consideration of a notice of motion given at a previous meeting. There is none. Notice of motion, there's none. Communications and correspondence, none. Unfinished business, we have none. Is there any questions, council? Or are we questioned out? Questioned out for the night. Any new business, council? Councillor Vasek?
Thanks. Quickly, Lincoln Heights Neighborhood Group is organizing Light Up Lincoln Heights again this year. So there will be, and already are, many houses all lit up. It was nice to go from Diwali into Christmas because there was much more festivity for a longer period of time. Anyways, it's a contest, so people get to vote on their favorite houses, and local businesses have put in like prizes. So a wonderful celebration.
Thank you for sharing that. That is lovely. Any other new business, council? Seeing none, enactment of bylaws. May I have someone to move the bylaws as printed? Councillor Vasek, and seconded by Councillor Wright. All in favor? That carries unanimously. And a mover to adjourn this meeting. Councillor Rowe and Councillor Bodley seconds. All in favor? Thank you. Good job on budget day. I should say budget drop. Yeah, FUN stands for finally understanding the numbers, but we'll figure that out next year.